Thank you. Good morning. I'm Carol Clark, chairing the meeting for Doug Pirelli today. We are not with a quorum just yet, so what we are going to do is start with the presentation by Travis Bowman, and I invite Travis to come forward and talk about his book. Thank you.
Good morning. We're good? So, sorry. My name is Travis Bowman. I am the head of collections for the Division for Historic Preservation, but this is very familiar to me. I was on the National Register unit for 7 years, from 2007 to 2014, so I gave lots of presentations to the State Review Board. I don't think anyone was on the board except maybe went. I had a reputation for writing kind of overly long nominations. So I eventually parlayed that. What's that? Oh, sure, they were great. So I parlayed that into writing an overly long book. So this morning we're here to talk about the American Revolution, and specifically the Sullivan campaign of the American Revolution. Hey, it worked. Which is one of the largest campaigns of the entire war, and certainly one of the largest American offenses of the war. And central to the story, especially here for us at Parks, is Philip Schuyler. So I tend to talk fast and I tend to wave my arms around. But we have a kind of a small crowd. So if anybody has a question, feel free to yell out and stop me. So the way the Sullivan campaign has been told for the past 250 years is as a very simple, very flat revenge narrative that there was frontier raiding in 1778, specifically at Wyoming and at Cherry Valley. And in response to that, George Washington ordered the destruction of the Haudenosaunee villages, the Six Nations, the Iroquois, whichever term you want to use to them. If you go anywhere dealing with the Sullivan campaign, including our own state historic site, Newtown Battlefield State Park, this is the plaque you'll see on the 1912 monument. It'll tell you exactly that, right? That General Sullivan met the natives at the Battle of Newtown, avenging the massacres of Wyoming, Cherry Valley, destroying the Iroquois Confederacy, ending attacks on our settlements, and thereby opening westward the path to civilization. So obviously this monument is 1912. The language is not something we appreciate anymore, but the real story behind the Sullivan campaign is actually much more complex than this. And it really begins in 1775. So as soon as the Second Continental Congress meets in 1775 in May, one of the first things they do is they create 3 Indian departments. The Northern Department, under Philip Schuyler, which is to deal with the Six Nations, to deal with the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois. The Middle Department, which deals specifically with the Shawnee, which are a large native confederacy sort of in the middle of the country. And the Southern Department, which is to deal with the Cherokee. So there are these 3 very large Indian confederacies to the west of rebel settlement, to the west of the Proclamation Line. And Congress, the Continental Congress, is very worried about these natives. They don't want them to be aligned to the British. They don't want them to cause problems, anything like that. So the first thing Philip Schuyler is ordered to do as Commissioner of Indian Affairs to the Northern Department is to meet with the Haudenosaunee and get a pledge of neutrality. So Schuyler is a seasoned frontier diplomat. He knows exactly what that means. That means you get the Six Nations, the League of the Haudenosaunee, to declare neutrality. But that means individual warriors are allowed to follow their own path. So this is something that they've been doing for 100 years since the Great Peace of Montreal. Everyone understood it. Sir William Johnson understood it. Basically, yes, an individual Mohawk can go and fight, but the Mohawk Nation itself is neutral. So we, just like if I went and fought for Ukraine, right now, even though the United States is neutral in that conflict. So he meets with the Haudenosaunee in 1775, right here in Albany, just down the road. And he gets this pledge of neutrality. So at this point in the war, very early in the war, May of 1775, the Six Nations have pledged to be neutral in the conflict. While this conference is happening in Albany, events are already progressing along the frontier. In 1774, the colonists of Virginia started a war against the Shawnee, Lord Dunmore's War. And in 1775, they were having treaty negotiations at Fort Pitt with the Shawnee, where they were forcing the Shawnee to give up all their land south of the Ohio River. That war started under the royal governor, under Lord Dunmore, but by the time they actually go to have the treaty negotiations, the Continental Congress is meeting. So the Continental Congress actually sends negotiators to the Fort Pitt Treaty to deal directly with the Shawnee. At the same time, the Continental Congress has ordered an invasion of Canada, and we start to send armies north, from Crown Point, from Ticonderoga, starting to go up north. Schuyler, as head of the Northern Department and as a major general in the Northern Army, is very specific to his soldiers. Do not harass the natives. They are neutral. Don't mess with them. Don't mess with the native. Don't mess with the Haudenosaunee, and don't mess with the Seven Fires, which are the sort of Canadian version of the Haudenosaunee who basically converted to Catholicism. The war in Canada goes extremely badly. They make it all the way to Quebec City on New Year's Eve in 1775. The commander of the expedition, Richard Montgomery, is killed. And at that point, the rebel troops start having to fall back. They fall back to Montreal. They fall back to a post known as the Cedars. And in 1776, in early 1776, the British begin counterattacking the rebel positions in Canada, and they attack at the Cedars. The Cedars is forced to surrender. After the surrender, the soldiers, the men, are stripped of their baggage. They're stripped of all their personal possessions, their guns and everything. This becomes propagandized into what's known as a massacre of the Cedars. So this actually appears in a British news publication of people like roasting a human being. That never happened. No one was murdered at the Cedars. But it becomes enough for Benedict Arnold, for the first time as an American commander rather than a British commander, to order the destruction of villages. So he says to burn the Seven Fires villages, give them no quarter. The commander of the rebel army who received this order actually refused to obey it. They didn't feel it was justified at the time, but it showed you how quick it went from Schuyler saying, do not harass the natives in any way, shape, or form, to burn the villages. It was lightning fast. At that point, Schuyler is ordered to have a second conference with the Haudenosaunee, this time at German Flats out in the Mohawk Valley. And they decide at that point, Washington decides, Schuyler decides, and Congress decides that the Haudenosaunee cannot be neutral. So this frontier diplomacy that had existed for 100 years or more, this flexible diplomacy where you can be neutral, but your warriors can fight, that's over. Schuyler goes to German Flats and he issues an ultimatum. You will either join our side or you are an enemy. And again, this is completely not in keeping with the traditional flexible diplomacy of the British or of the Haudenosaunee or anyone else. But while this is happening, to back up their threat, at the same time they are meeting with the Haudenosaunee at German Flats, the Cherokee are being overrun in the Middle Department, and they are being forced into land concessions. There's a Cherokee War in 1776. 52 villages are burned. So the Haudenosaunee send representatives to the treaty conference where the Cherokee are giving up land, and they're hearing this same sort of thing. The Cherokee started a war, and we took their land. Because punishment for that war is if you fight us, you're against us. Or in this case, even if you're neutral, you're against us. So the context of both of these treaty conferences that the Haudenosaunee are having with the rebel government is they're seeing the Shawnee give up all their land. They're seeing the Cherokee give up all their land. They're already in a bad position. That position gets worse in 1777 when several warriors of the Haudenosaunee, in particular people from the Seneca nations and from the Cayuga nations, decide to take part in the British expedition of 1777, and particularly at the Battle of the Oriskany. So even though at that battle, warriors from the Oneida Nation and the Tuscarora nations decided to side with the Americans, with the rebels, because of this event where both sides fought each other and the Great Law of Peace was shattered and warriors took active participation, this is the event that is used to condemn the Haudenosaunee because they were offered neutrality, and then that neutrality was pulled and said you have to be an ally. This was what was used to say you were no longer an ally. In February 1778, Philip Schuyler writes to Congress and he recommends burning Iroquois. So you'll notice, if you're really good at math and calendars like I am, this is February 1778. These are before the events at Wyoming. These are before the events at Cherry Valley. And Philip Schuyler has already recommended burning out the Haudenosaunee. That was the slide. It takes Congress a while to get around to actually authorizing the expedition. Schuyler has to write back several times saying, what's going on? How come you haven't authorized this? In June of 1778, Congress says, yes, go burn out the Seneca, go burn out the Cayuga, and also go all the way to Detroit, which was a sort of a pipe dream on the behalf of Congress. Schuyler is absolutely ecstatic. He writes a letter to George Washington. He says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a force. We're going to leave from Fort Stanwix. We're going to march across. We're going to go across Oneida Lake. We're going to go down. We're going to burn out the Onondaga. We're we're going to burn out the Cayuga, we're going to march overland, and we're going to burn out the Seneca. And he outlines this entire plan for George Washington. George Washington gets the plan and he says, I have no idea what you're talking about. Congress had not informed George Washington that he was supposed to lead the expedition. He's actually off in New Jersey fighting the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse at the time. And he writes back to Schuyler and he says, I don't know what you're talking about. I'll take a look at it later. I'm kind of busy at the moment. While that's happening, in July of 1778, the Wyoming Valley Massacre, and I use the massacre in quotes, happens. So what happens in the Wyoming Valley of Pennsylvania is there's a series of forts. They are attacked by the British commanders. The British the British tell the forts to surrender. Two of the forts decide not to surrender, and they decide instead to send out a sortie to attack the British. The men who sortie out of the forts at Wyoming Valley are not very well trained. They start firing at 500 yards, which the range of a musket is about 50 yards effectively. And the Indians are literally sitting around looking at them like, what are these guys doing? At one point, Butler, the British commander of the native forces, just says, why don't we just lay down? Which is what they do. They lay down. The rebel troops keep advancing. They keep firing. And then after they fire the last volley, the native troops stand up. They surround the rebel soldiers and they kill or capture most of them. After they are killed or captured, several of them are actually killed after they are captured, and Butler sort of has to rein people back in. Instead of that being the narrative of surrendering men killed in the field after battle, the narrative becomes that women and children were killed. So someone writes a hit piece in the Poughkeepsie newspaper and talks about this Wyoming massacre where women and children are killed. I believe the someone who wrote it was William Livingston. Sorry, Went. Since he had a propensity to do this sort of thing. You can look at every single record that comes out of Wyoming. You can look at the governor's report. You can look at the British reports. You can look at the rebel army reports. There is not a single woman or child killed at Wyoming. And there is no record of anyone killed, any civilians killed at Wyoming. The Wyoming massacre is a complete fabrication on behalf of whoever wrote this piece. But that becomes enough for New York to really start to panic. So guys like Governor Clinton, guys like Robert Livingston, guys like James Duane, and guys like John Jay really started full court press, and Philip Schuyler, of course, started full court press onto George Washington. You have to do something, you have to do something, you have to do something. They've burned Wyoming, they've murdered women and children. New York is next. And Washington decides to order retaliatory strikes. And those retaliatory strikes happen at two villages, Unadilla and Onondaga in October 1778, and then two more villages at Chemung and Tioga in September 1778. And this is the retaliation for Wyoming. So these are forward raider bases where native groups like Joseph Brant and Butler's Rangers would operate out of these places so that they can go up and burn parts of the valley. So these are military strikes at military targets. The guy who leads the expedition to Chemung is a guy named Colonel Thomas Hartley. For some reason, Colonel Thomas Hartley decides to leave a letter to the chiefs at Chemung, and in that letter, he accuses them of killing women and children at Wyoming. I don't know why he did this. It was very stupid, but then he goes on to write, I came into your country so easily. No one stopped me. I could burn every village in your country without any problem whatsoever. If you want to piss off native warriors, this is the way you do it. And they respond in kind at Cherry Valley. And they say directly that Cherry Valley was a response to Hartley's taunting them at Chemung. And they actually write this letter to John Canteen, who's a colonel of the Ulster County Militia. So we can literally look at the records and see this escalation of violence as it's happening. So now that two villages in New York have been attacked at Cherry Valley, they once again go into this sort of full court press on Washington. So Washington goes into his winter quarters and he is just starting to gather intelligence. And the main guy he's gathering intelligence from is Philip Schuyler. Schuyler is again telling him, here are the routes how you get into Iroquois. Here's how you should do it. Here's the best way to burn them out. So in 1778, Congress sends his report to Washington sends his report to Congress of this is what I can do for 1779. He's like, number one, what I always want to do is take back New York City. This is Washington's number one goal for the entire war. He's incapable of doing it for the entire war. He actually tests the defenses around New York City in 1778 at the Battle of Stockbridge, where he sends, or the Battle of Kingsbridge, where he sends the Stockbridge militia into a fortified position, and they get completely wiped out. So badly that the British commander actually says he feels bad for them. So he knows he can't take New York City. His second objective is to reinvade Canada. And then he writes this very sort of long paragraph. Well, if we reinvade Canada and this time we manage to actually take it, now that we're allied with the French, what if the French want it back? So, you know, the French invasion of Canada is not a good idea. What we can do is conduct small operations against the Indians. And what he means by small operations against the Indians is sending 1/4 of the American army on a full-scale invasion of a foreign power. While this is happening, Congress is also doing other things. Spain is thinking about entering the war, and they reach out to the French and they say, what do the Americans actually want if they win the war? And it seems like this sort of very strange question to us, but the Americans, and Congress in particular, hadn't outlined any war aims. All we wrote was the Declaration of Independence, and then we sort of sat around and said, this is great. But Spain says you need to actually define what your war aims are if you win, because if we join and the French are in, there's a good chance you can win, so what do you want? And Congress produces this report in February of 1779 that says, what we want is the western border of the United States to be the Mississippi River. And this is totally non-negotiable. So they list all these demands, but this is the only one that is absolutely non-negotiable. And again, for those of us who are paying attention this whole time, they've already broken the Shawnee Confederacy in 1774, and they've already broken the Cherokee Confederacy in 1776. And now here we are in 1779, deciding whether we should authorize Washington's expedition to go attack the Haudenosaunee. And that's exactly what they do. They authorize the expedition. And the next question becomes, who should lead this massive invasion of a foreign power on the western edge of New York? And John Jay, who is one of the single most conservative guys in Congress, writes a letter to Philip Schuyler, and he says, you should lead this expedition. You know why? Because you can gather them proper, you can gather laurels for the sake of your country and your children, and you can leave them a sufficient share of property. That's a very odd thing to say, right? Maybe this campaign is less about avenging the massacres of Wyoming and Cherry Valley, and maybe more about actually stealing native land by using a large-scale invasion. If only someone had left us a record saying that exact sort of thing. Someone like, say, maybe Congressman James Duane, who writes to his friend Philip Schuyler and says, we have a right to full and adequate compensation for the loss of lives and property, husbandry, and so they are make it by assignment of part of their territories. Oh, well, that's really helpful. Someone wrote a very famous book about the Sullivan campaign and said, it is so obvious the campaign is about land, but Washington never says it. And Sullivan never says it, so how can it be about land? And unfortunately, what that historian missed was all the records in New York State that tell you very, very clearly that this campaign is all about land. Schuyler refuses to actually lead the campaign. He's sick with gout at the time, but he still continues to advise George Washington on the route they should take. So Washington takes a look at the routes, and he decides the best thing to do is to march his army up from eastern Pennsylvania to Tioga Point, come up parallel to the lakes so that his flanks are protected, burn out the Cayuga, and then march overland and burn out the Seneca. So unfortunately for Schuyler's plan, this leaves out the Onondaga, because the Onondaga are completely neutral. They have not taken part in any of the raiding. They didn't take part at Oriskany. They're 100% neutral. Schuyler then writes a letter to Washington and says, what if I just send our troops, the New York line, to just real quick leave from Fort Stanwix, go across Oneida Lake, quick bow down, and burn out the Onondaga? And here's why. Because if we burn the Onondaga, it will scare the other nations so badly that they'll come into line. They'll sue for peace. They won't want to fight with the United States anymore. And Washington says, okay, the same day, literally he has this letter in hand. Schuyler authorizes the expedition to burn out the Onondaga. He gets a letter that not only are the Onondaga neutral, but the majority of their chiefs, of their sachems, have decided to join the United States. 40 of them have come in and said, we get it. We're going to join up with the United States. So they're not even neutral anymore. They are now literally pro-American. Instead, Schuyler sends orders to Gauss Van Skyke of the 5th New York from Van Skyke Island, right down the road from Peebles. And he says, you're going to go and you're going to burn out the Onondaga. Literally writes the orders as he has the peace negotiations in his hands. The orders are very strange. Number one, he tells them there's a whole lot of Oneida who hang around Fort Stanwix, where this expedition is leaving from. Don't tell them, because the Oneida have worked very hard to get the Onondaga to come in and join with the rebel troops. The other thing, and is the only time I've ever seen this order in any 18th century orders, or even any 17th century orders. By the way, Gauss Van Skyke, while you're out there, try not to rape anybody. I don't know what happened that Gauss Van Skyke was accused of this, but he was specifically ordered not to engage in sexual violence against the Onondaga. So the plan works. They go, they burn the 3 villages of the Onondaga in April of 1779. Immediately, the Cayugas say, we get it. We understand, we're next. They send representatives to the Oneida, to the Americans, to the rebels, and say, we want to come in. We want to join up. We want to sue for peace. We don't want our villages burned. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Washington then writes a letter and says, they don't really want peace. All they want is not to be burned. So let's burn them anyway. And that's what they do. In 1779, they take a quarter of the American army, including some of the best units that we have in the American Army at the time. Morgan's Riflemen's, the 5th New Hampshire, all the guys who were very famous, very good fighters. And they go and they burn 40-something villages of the Haudenosaunee. And the war, the 1779 campaigns, aren't against the villages, they're against the food. And Washington and Schuyler say the stated goal of the campaign is to starve them. That is the goal. They go at exactly the right time to make sure the corn can't be replanted for the season. They have intelligence in their hands that say the British can't feed them, even though we know what's going to happen. All these refugees are going to scream into places like Fort Niagara and beg for food. And they just burn a massive amount of food. Exactly as we expect, these refugees end up at places like Fort Niagara, begging for food from the British. The British do everything possible to get them some supplies, but in the end, somewhere around 10 to 20% of the people starve to death, especially outside of Fort Niagara, because it turns out that the winter of 1779 was the coldest winter in the history of the United States. New York Harbor froze. At one point, the rebels actually attacked Staten Island with cannons by charging across the ice in the harbor. When the Sullivan campaign is over, everyone congratulates themselves. They go back to Tioga Point, go back to Easton, Pennsylvania. And this guy, Reverend Israel Evans, gives a big, long sermon talking about all the great work they did. And again, they tell you exactly what this is about. I see these lands inhabited by the independent states of America. I congratulate posterity on the addition of immense wealth and extensive territory to the United States. They're telling you the campaign was about taking the Haudenosaunee land. The army was so happy with Israel's speech that they actually had it printed up and every soldier was given a copy of it. The question then becomes, however, who gets that land? Does Congress get the land? Because this is all land west of the proclamation line, or does New York State get the land? There's only one guy we can send to Congress to make sure that New York State gets the land. And who is that guy? Philip Schuyler. They literally send Philip Schuyler to Congress, and they send Robert Livingston to Congress. And I have Livingston's instructions that say you are being sent to Congress to argue the land claims. For no other reason, you were going to go and you're going to make sure your land. So Livingston and Schuyler get to Congress. They're literally shown, Schuyler writes a letter to Governor Clinton. They're literally shown into a back room and a line is drawn on a map at Fort Niagara. And they said, New York has some sort of vague claims to everything west of this line. What if you just took everything east of this line? Would you give up everything west of that line? And Schuyler and Livingston write to Clinton, the governor, and they said, that sounds great. So literally in a backroom deal, with a line drawn on the map, New York State gets Iroquois, gets all of this land between Rome and the Great Lake. Suddenly, Schuyler's decision to attack the Onondaga makes a lot more sense, because we have this very famous thing in New York State we call the military tract, where the surveyor DeWitt Clinton overlays all these new towns, and gives them all these really cool classical names like Ovid and Homer and all these great things. This is right where the Onondaga were. The military tract is used by New York State to pay its soldiers. Like all the states in the Revolution, they were broke. The only way they could pay their soldiers was to give them land bounties. And the military tract, which is mostly Onondaga land, but a little bit of Cayuga land, was how they paid their soldiers. And right after almost at the end of the war, New York State authorizes the Surveyor General to start handing out these tracts of land to the soldiers as payment for service in the war. And then 3 days later, Schuyler is named Surveyor General of New York State. So literally the guy who ignored peace requests at German Flats and who pressed for an invasion of Iroquois before any raiding had started ever. And then the guy who burns out the Onondaga for no reason whatsoever is literally now the guy in charge of handing out parcels to the bounty soldiers. Once we have that, and once the war is over, the idea is we need to settle all this land out in western New York State very quickly. The way they come up with that is to create a canal. That's the fastest way. We're going to ram a canal right through those old Iroquois lands. And Schuyler, of course, is also very famously one of the leaders of the Western Inland Lock Navigation Company. So you could really pin it. I gave this talk at Schuyler Mansion, but they didn't string me up or anything. You could really pin this entire thing on Philip Schuyler. I mean, he, from the beginning to the end, pushed for this settlement of Western New York and this literal taking of Haudenosaunee lands without any reason to do so. So this is Daniel's favorite part of the whole presentation, where I very famously show you this map of the Erie Canal running through upstate New York. And it's great. We've all seen this map before, and it's the bicentennial, and we're so excited about the canal. But really, this is the map you should be looking at, because that canal runs straight through the Six Nations lands, right through all of them. And you can see, without stealing literally that Tuscarora and that Onondaga and all these lands, this is where Washington came up. And then they came across and they burned out the Cayuga and they burned out the Seneca and everything else. The whole Sullivan campaign was not a reaction to raiding in 1778. It was a well-coordinated effort by New York State, in particular Philip Schuyler, Robert Livingston, James Duane, John Jay, to take Haudenosaunee land. And whereas that Cherokee land I showed you earlier was actually taken in part by the federal government, and part of the Shawnee lands were taken in part by their federal government, New York State literally tricked the federal government into giving them all of this land. So instead of having to do it themselves and go fight and send militia, they just sort of outsourced it to the feds, and the feds fell for it. So that's an awesomely depressing way to start off your morning. Now we can talk about all these great nominations that are probably happening in all of this land. Any questions?
What inducement did Schuyler give initially to the Native Americans to persuade them to be neutral at the start?
They wanted to be neutral. I mean, so if you read the Albany Conference minutes, they basically say this is a fight between brothers. We don't want to be involved. And even when John Johnson meets them at Fort Ontario a year later, they say the same thing. We don't want to be involved. This is a fight between brothers. Like the Bostonians is what they call the rebels. The Bostonians are crazy. It's not our problem. But again, it's the old wise sachems who are saying this, but the young warriors want to go out. They want to go out and get glory because this is a way to promote themselves in society. But if you read Johnson, for say the French and Indian War, it's the same thing. Johnson convinces Mohawk to go fight with him on the Canadian invasion. But at the same time, the Seneca are trading with the French at Fort Niagara because they're neutral. And they say the same thing. This is a fight. It's not our problem. We don't want to be involved. All we want is to not have our villages burned, which unfortunately, because of Schuyler, didn't happen.
That is kind of negative story to start on bicentennial celebrations.
But Daniel hasn't fired me yet, so must.
Travis, I think your fellow staff, those to whom you have presented this presentation, made New York State Commission as well. It's been made at several historic sites. I mean, Travis is very much on tour with this lecture in support of a deeply researched and deeply footnoted book that was just published this fall.
All proceeds go to the National Heritage Trust.
Right.
Just so we know.
The National Heritage Trust. So
We all had ethics training. All goes to National Heritage. It's all went through Jacob and the ethics committee and everything.
It is remarkable scholarship, exemplary of not only your talents as a researcher and documentarian and interpreter, but indicative of the staff we have in place at the Bureau of Historic Sites, the staff we have in place at SHFO, at the Parks Agency. So it is a tough story. It is one that I think the agency is very much committed to telling in detail as with the context of the commemorative period. There is a Sullivan campaign trail across Pennsylvania and New York that was really very much came into being in the 1920s at the 150th celebration of the American Revolution. The Newtown Battlefield Marker monument precedes that, but the commemorative markers that stretch across Pennsylvania and all the way through the Finger Lakes out to Fort Niagara are. Isn't that good? You came all the way down for that. Thank you, Anya. That campaign trail is deeply in need of reinterpretation or contextual interpretation, and I suspect that we will be making commitments with our agency's funding received in support of the Semi-Quincentennial Commission. Will be one of the projects it goes to. This is a story that we need to tell far more effectively than is currently interpreted on the New York landscape. So, Travis.
We now have a quorum. Can everybody hear me? Great. I'm going to call the meeting to order and conduct the roll call. I'm going to report that we happily have a quorum, and I'll call the meeting to order and conduct the roll call. I'm Carol Clark, and I'm pleased to announce that I'm a recent recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Preservation Alumni of Columbia University, and I'm a member of this board for the past 6 years. Gretchen?
I'm Gretchen Soren. I'm the director of the Cooperstown Graduate Program in Cooperstown, New York.
I don't know if this is on. I'm Winter Aldrich, a former deputy commissioner for historic preservation, and I fill a historian's seat.
And I am Fabiana Chiu Rinaldi, and I am here representing the New York State Council on the Arts.
Hi, I'm Molly Garfinkel. I am co-director of City Lore in New York City, and I'm an architectural historian.
I'm Heather Mabey. I am chair of the Saratoga Capital District Region State Parks Commission, but I am here representing Brian Ern for the state parks. Heather, can you do that one more time? I'm sorry. Your mic wasn't on. I am Heather Mabey. I am the chair of the Saratoga Capital District Region State Park Commission, and I am here representing Brian Ern from State Parks.
Good morning. My name's Erica Krieger. I'm an architect, and I'm here representing the Secretary of State for the Department of State.
I'm Peter Rubin, the Director of Office of Indian Nation Affairs for the New York State DEC, representing the Commissioner of the DEC.
Thank you, everyone. The next order of business is the approval of the March 2025 meeting minutes. Are there any comments or corrections?
I make a motion to approve. Heather Mabey.
Thank you, Heather. All in favor? Oh, any second,
Seconded.
please?
I'll second Eric Krieger.
Thank you. The minutes are approved by unanimous consent. Now we will move to the National Register nomination reviews. And I believe first up is Leslie Krupa.
Good morning. I have three beautiful, is that better? I have three beautiful residential properties that I'm going to present to you this morning. We'll start off first with the Moorings, located in Franklin County. The Moorings is a residential complex consisting of several buildings from 1918, as well as a home built in 1965 by the notable Adirondack architect William Diston. It is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as an outstanding example of Diston's later work, and because it illustrates the ways in which Adirondack architecture shifted in the 20th century. The period of significance is 1918 to 1965, and this is an honorary nomination. The Moorings is located on the eastern shore of Big Wolf Lake, located in what is sometimes referred to as the Tri-Lakes region of the Adirondacks. It consists of Lake Placid, Saranac Lake, and Tupper Lake. Although part of the town of Tupper Lake, the property is north of the village in a wooded lakeside setting within a neighborhood community centered around the lake. This nomination includes the four contributing buildings shown on the map, the Lake House, Beach House, and Carriage House that date from 1918, and the Diston Design residence that's called Wintergreen, which you can see on is the northernmost part of the collection of buildings. The 1918 buildings that are seen here were built by Frederick P. Kelly, who is a relatively unknown architect from New York City. He was commissioned by Arthur Rice, an avid outdoorsman and chief executive of the Campfire Clubs of America. Only 2 years later, Rice sold the property to the Moore family of Bronxville, who owned it off and on until 2002. These buildings exhibit classic Adirondack rustic designs, such as sprawling covered porches, untreated wood applied in a simple but decorative manner, and multiple screened-in areas. Self-sufficiency was a value that many Adirondack visitors shared in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The desire for independence manifested in Adirondack design by incorporating many essential functions into one camp, but separating them into individual buildings by function. For example, at the larger great camps, one may see a dining hall, staff quarters, boathouse, laundry facilities, carriage houses, and a farm. By the time that the Moorings was built, the preference for this was waning, furthered by resorts like the Sagamore that started to centralize their functions under one roof. The moorings combined both methods with the centralized kitchen, dining, and ice house, but it also maintained a separate carriage house and boathouse. Here are some interiors of the 1918 main house. You can see the pine walls are board and batten, and the centralized stone chimney is standard for its time. The kitchen dates from the 1950s, and the carriage house and boathouse have been converted to guest rooms or small apartments without altering the exteriors. In 1965, the second generation of the Moore family hired William Diston to construct a new residence on the site that could be used year-round, which you can see here on the bottom. As a year-round residence, the family named it Wintergreen. Some examples of Diston's earlier work at DeBar Pond Lodge, which is listed on the National Register, that can be seen on the top middle, and St. John's in the Wilderness in Saranac Lake is on the top right. Diston was originally from Plattsburgh, but moved to Saranac Lake with his family in high school. It was there in 1900 that he started his career as a draftsman for the renowned Adirondack architect William Coulter. The turn of the century marked a period of productivity where Coulter focused on great camps and residences in Saranac Lake. It was here that Diston would have learned how to anticipate and satisfy the shifting preferences of clients as the 20th century progressed. Diston went on to make a name for himself and became one of the region's most distinguished architects. He worked on a wide variety of projects, including the great camps such as Eagle's Nest, Wonundra, and Minnow Brook. In the 1960s, he designed several smaller camps along Big Wolf Lake, including Wintergreen, and he was also the designer of the ice arena in Lake Placid. These were some of the latest works he completed before. Wintergreen and the residences on Big Wolf Lake were some of the latest works that he completed before his death in 1970. Wintergreen merges traditional Adirondack building practices, such as using natural materials, with designs that reflect post-World War II architecture. Wintergreen is a ranch-style home that centralizes all the functions under one roof. It includes outdoor access, but because the building is weatherized, the focus has moved from traditional wraparound porches and screened-in rooms to views from the interior. Rather than emphasize its Adirondack setting, the kitchen, for example, which can be seen on the right, reflects the time in which it was built. For example, wrought iron detailing, brick walls, and built-in wall ovens would not be out of place in a 1960s suburban Long Island home. Wintergreen reflects widespread modernism that was sweeping the nation while also illustrating the work of a master Adirondack architect. At the moorings, Diston's use of multiple types of high-end wood, open trussing, and custom built-ins are all hallmarks of his style. As a whole, the moorings exhibits Adirondack designs carried over from the 19th century and shows how those precedents were applied much later in the 20th century. This is an honorary nomination sponsored by the moorings' current owner, Howard Kirschenbaum. Are there any questions?
Hearing none, we'll ask for a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the moorings.
Second,
A second.
any abstentions? I'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Then the vote passes. There are none opposed. And we thank you, Leslie. You may move on to the next item.
Okay.
I want to make a comment
Mhm.
that I actually met Mr. Destin and I knew him. And so
Speak into the microphone, and before making comments, let's please remember something I was asked today for the first time to do, which is to have us speak our name out loud again before commenting so the record is clear.
I'm Heather Mabey, and I just wanted to make a mention that I met Mr. Destin as a child and have been to many of his camps in the Adirondacks. And I think this is wonderful that he's being recognized for his amazing work as an architect in the Adirondacks.
Thank you, Heather.
And this is Wint. I think this is the third, and maybe more than the third, landmark property owned and occupied by Howie Kirschenbaum, and he's to be commended. I don't know if he's going to keep on doing this wonderful thing, but he's among the top preservationists in the region.
Thank you very much. I will continue on with the Snell Gillette House. The Snell Gillette House is located in the small town of Teresa in Jefferson County. This home was built circa 1880 and is significant under Criterion C architecture as one of the best examples of Queen Anne architecture in Teresa. The period of significance extends to circa 1893 due to an addition made to the west side of the home around that time. This is an honorary nomination. The Snell Gillette House is located between Watertown and the St. Lawrence River in the northeast corner of the state. The house is to the east of downtown Teresa, just past the Indian River, which is historically the lifeblood of the town, with many mills that it had supported. The section of the village is residential, with large lots and many large houses built for early mill owners. The Snell Gillette House was one such property built for a wealthy businessman and his family. Jacob H. Snell co-owned the Snell and Makepeace flour mill just a stone's throw away from the property where he decided to build his home there around 1880. The house was originally symmetrical with a centered porch and wall dormer that can be seen in this historic photograph from the 1880s on the left. As the Snell's children grew into adulthood, it appears that the family decided to expand the house to the west to accommodate multiple generations. This created the plan of the house as it appears today. The house includes many notable Queen Anne details, such as highly decorative dormers, multi-story window bays, and spindlework. Some identical details, like the spindlework brackets in the corner, can be seen on neighboring houses. This indicates that by 1880, pattern books and prefabricated designs were available to ship even to remote and isolated parts of New York via the railroad. The interior of the Snell Gillette House also retains excellent integrity and reflects the wealth that successful Victorian industrialists like the Snells would have wanted to present. There are original wood floors and paneling throughout the house, colorful stained glass doors and windows, and rooms designed to allow for abundant light prior to the arrival of electricity. You can see here on the left another example of pre-made spindle brackets that would have been available to order, as well as the rosette pattern door frame. It might be a little dark to see up here. The property also includes an original carriage house that was slightly modified into a vet's office when the Gillette family purchased it in the 1960s. In short, the Snell Gillette House is one of the most well-preserved examples of Queen Anne architecture in Teresa, and it also reflects multi-generational living patterns common during the Victorian period. The house's owner and sponsor, Amy Gillette Stannard, is on the line and may like to say a few short words. Amy, we can't hear you if you're potentially muted. Okay, so we'll move on we'll go ahead and move on to questions.
Questions, comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Wint, and a second?
I'll second.
Heather? Any abstentions? None? Okay, the vote is in favor.
Great, thank you so much. We're moving right along. Okay, third and final today is Mohican Point. Mohican Point is a private family estate located on the western shore of Lake George, just south of Bolton Landing in Warren County. The earliest structure on the site dates to approximately 1850, but the majority of the buildings were constructed in 1901 and 1902 by notable Philadelphia architect Wilson Eyre Jr. And I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. The property is eligible under Criterion C architecture as a distinct example of a Lake George estate built in a neoclassical style. Mohican Point is located on the eastern shore of Lake George, historically known as Millionaire's Row, due to the large number of seasonal retreats that well-to-do city dwellers built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Mohican Point estate consists of 11 contributing resources and only one non-contributing dock. The buildings are largely centered on the northern part of the property, but the primary resource is the main house, often called the big house or main cottage, overlooking the lake. At the turn of the century, William Bixby, an investor and art collector from St. Louis, bought the Mohican Point property. At that time, a small but well-known hotel called Mohican House graced the site. The oldest part of the hotel was nearly a century old at the time of Bixby's purchase, and despite initial efforts to occupy it, Bixby found it unsatisfactory as a family retreat. Although the hotel was demolished, 2 buildings were left. One, Fallen Arches, served to house staff of the hotel, and it still remains on its original site in the northwest corner of the property. The other, Stevens Cottage, was an annex of the Mohican House used for guests, and it was moved to its present site in the 1920s. Please note that the nomination will be updated to reflect this. The draft that you received erroneously said these 2 buildings were moved circa 1901, and then we had additional information that narrowed those dates. The Bixby family hired Philadelphia architect Wilson Eyre Jr., who was likely introduced via Charles Freer, a mutual friend of Bixby's. Wilson Eyre had made a name as a prolific and highly skilled architect working in the shingle style. One of the most acclaimed shingle style buildings of his early career was Charles Freer's house in Detroit, which is seen on the left. As his career progressed, Eyre was largely interested in English country homes, as he had been born in Italy and studied throughout Europe as he was growing into his career. As his career progressed, Eyre was largely interested in English country homes, fine arts, and magazine publishing. He was also well known for his detailed renderings and concepts, such as the one on the right that he had sketched for Mohican Point. Unlike the other mansions that lined Millionaire's Row, Eyre designed most of the buildings on the site in a neoclassical style. This included a boathouse and a bathhouse with columns, a pedimented garage with attached ice house, and a laundry and maintenance building. With its full-height ionic columns, denticulated pediments, and a stunning location, Eyre featured the main house in the first issue of House and Garden magazine, which he co-founded in 1901. After successfully investing in railroads and other ventures, Bixby retired to a life of book and art collecting. Likely inspired by images and stories of antiquity, Bixby had Eyre carry classical elements throughout the interior of the house, as you can see here in the billiard room and the grand stairway. In 1959, an architect within the Bixby family partially remodeled the interior of the main house to accommodate multiple generations of Bixby's descendants who visit each summer. Bedrooms largely on the second floor were converted to private apartments, but they largely retained original details such as fireplaces, decorative door surrounds, and original windows and floors. This configuration has allowed 7 generations of Bixbys to enjoy the property established by their ancestor 125 years ago. This is an honorary nomination sponsored by the Bixby family. I believe William Bixby's great-granddaughter, Nancy McClure Golden, is on the line. She was a great help in preparing this nomination, and I think she might like to say a few words of support. Nancy, if you're online, just make sure you're unmuted.
I want to thank you for considering listing Mohican Point on the National Register of Historic Places. This means a great deal to me and to the rest of our family. And I want to thank Leslie Krupa for her really exhaustive work on helping me with the application. I continue to go to the lake every summer, as I did as a child, and it was unusual to be there with 3 generations. My grandmother and her brothers, and then all of our cousins from all over the country. Being on the National Register will be good for Bolton Landing and good for Lake George. It's wonderful to nominate this very special place. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Nancy. Are there any questions about this nomination?
Hearing none, then we'll move to the vote. Do I hear a motion to approve? Molly, a second? Wint? So that's all in favor, and that means that we are approving this nomination with unanimous consent.
That's all I have today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Molly.
It's done.
And now Aaron.
No, not quite. That's happening. National Park Service has something to say.
Good morning. I have one presentation for you today. This is the Bleecker District Number 3 School, located in the town of Bleecker, Fulton County, and is being nominated for the National Register under Criterion A in the area of education as one of the last one-room schoolhouses in the Bleecker District after consolidation in the early 20th century. The school was built in 1873 in the settlement of Bleecker Village and serviced the community until 1956, when the last schoolhouses were closed and consolidated into the enlarged Gloversville School District. The first European settlements began in the area around 1800, with the main attraction of the area being abundant mature forests for lumber and milling and tanning of hides for shoe leather. The local watercourses powered the sawmills and made it possible to get logs to market via Stony Creek and its tributaries that flowed into the Sacandaga River and the Hudson. By 1855, there were 19 sawmills and 4 tanneries in the town of Bleecker. Bleecker Tannery was the southernmost, located on the outlet of Vandenberg Pond, now Lake Edward. Bleecker Village developed around this tannery, and by 1878 had a hotel, brewery, church, schoolhouse, 2 sawmills, 2 tanneries, a store, a broom handle factory, 6 blacksmith shops, and 23 dwellings that were home to about 200 people. When the town of Bleecker was formed in 1831, there was 1 school in the district, built in 1824. By 1845, as the population of the town grew, 3 more schoolhouses were built. By 1905, there were 5 district schoolhouses. The current number 3 schoolhouse was the 3rd schoolhouse built in Bleecker Village. In 1873, the district decided a new building was warranted and the old schoolhouse would be sold to the highest bidder. The location of the new schoolhouse was mandated by the state within walking distance for students from the surrounding area. Students were placed in groups by age or ability and taught reading, writing, spelling, arithmetic, and geography. The school adopted state-mandated textbooks in 1877, which included Robinson's Arithmetic, Clark's Grammar and Reader, Watson's Independent Speller, and a geography book. With the adoption of the Central Rural Schools Act of 1924, there were increasing pressure to consolidate small rural schools across the state. District School Number 5 had already closed in 1923, and District School Number 1 closed in 1932. In 1956, the Master Plan for School District Reorganization in New York State was enacted and proposed sweeping changes to how districts were organized. In 1956, a special meeting of the Bleecker District was called to either discuss improvements and alterations to the number 3 school building or vote to close the school and send its pupils to the Wheelerville Union Free School. A majority voted to close the school and send the children to Wheelerville. In 1969, the school building was sold into private hands. The design and construction of the number 3 school was characteristic of a typical rural one-room school building of the 19th century, as was described by William Alcott, Henry Barnard, and the New York State Department of Public Instruction 40, consisting of a large single classroom, an entrance vestibule, and an ell that contained a wood shed, and less typically a privy. The exterior details of the building are also typical of the simplest form of a one-room schoolhouse type. A gable roof, wood clapboard siding, simple wood trim, fieldstone foundation, 2-over-2 double-hung windows, and a brick chimney. The school's interior finishes are similarly typical of the one-room schoolhouse type, with horizontal beaded wainscoting, plaster walls behind the wood paneling, tongue and groove wood floors, wood interior doors and trim, and the hanging globe lights that were added when the building was electrified in the 1930s. The entrance vestibule provides access to the classroom and the woodshed, with the privy in the corner of the woodshed. This is an honorary nomination written by Stephen Engelhardt with a Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Grant from the National Park Service. Are there any questions?
Hearing none, then we'll move to the vote. Do I hear a motion to approve? Erica? Second? Molly? All right, the item does pass. The nomination is approved with unanimous consent.
Thank you.
Oh, I have to ask for the vote. Asking for the vote. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is just insurance. I inhaled some dust last week, so hopefully I won't get a coughing fit. What do we do here? Okay. So I have 2 nominations today, and the first of them is the final component from the textile factory buildings in Troy, MPDF, which included 9 buildings associated with the collar and cuff industry in Troy. The MPDF was completed in 2014, and over the last decade, we've slowly listed all of the resources identified, mostly thanks to Bill Krattinger, and all but one was a tax credit project. And Bill actually wrote this nomination draft a few years ago for the PDIL. So thank you, Bill. It's also fitting that we're ending with this one because it is the most recent and the last remaining architectural component from the once expansive Cluett Peabody textile factory, which occupied a full city block on the west side of River Street, just north of the Green Island Bridge. And that is what you see in this photo. The nominated building is on the far right, but all of the earlier brick buildings belonging to Cluett Peabody to its left were demolished in 1965, leaving the monumental reinforced concrete daylight factory and its ancillary features. This is the building from the River Street side, showing its east and north elevations, with the east one being the facade. The building was designed by Westinghouse, Church, Kerr and Company, and it was both the culmination of Cluett Peabody's physical development and the most structurally advanced manufacturing building constructed for the collar and cuff industry in Troy. Built in 1916-17, the 8-story building is constructed of reinforced concrete with concrete floor and ceiling slabs, and the structure is clearly evident, defined by a simple series of piers and spandrels, with the spaces between entirely filled with windows, originally small pane steel casements. A few of those survived, but the majority were replaced when the building was converted into offices a few years ago. The building is L-shaped, and there are subtle decorative differences between the 5 bays to the right, which forms the L, and those to the left. And this is from the south, and you can see the L here, as well as the 2 1965-67 additions that were built to house technical and data processing functions for the company. Try to overlook the fanciful mural, which depicts actual, current, and past Trojans at street level. From the riverside, this is a great picture. You can see 3 extremely important components: the powerhouse and boiler house, which are the 2 lower scale sections, and they're linked by a hyphen. These were built in 1903 and 1917. They predate this portion of the factory. And the 130-foot tall smokestack between them. And then the 1960s alterations are to the far right. Here is a 1950 Sanborn map that illustrates the entire complex prior to the 1965 demolition. Each section of the building is clearly delineated. The nominated section is in gray, indicating its concrete building material. while the other brick buildings are in pink. The interior has been altered for office space, but in many places, the structural system of mushroom columns and concrete floors and ceilings is fully revealed. The boiler and powerhouse are built of reinforced concrete with steel frames, and they are magnificently intact. They retain significant spatial, structural, and mechanical features. This is the boiler room, and the powerhouse retains an historic period generator and fire pump. The Cluett, Peabody and Company evolved from a small company that made collars and cuffs to the nationally significant manufacturer of Aero shirts with 11 factories nationwide. This building chronicles the company's important role in Troy's textile industry, its significant presence in the city, and the company's substantial technical achievements. It's a tax credit project. It has an approved Part 1 and an approved Part 2. It's currently the home of Troy City Hall, but apparently we're moving out soon. Any questions about the Cluett building?
Is this roughly contemporary with the buildings at, this is Wint, roughly contemporary with the buildings at People's Island that we know so well?
Who knows the answer to that? I looked up what the buildings at Cluett at I think they're earlier.
Nope, this is contemporary.
It's contemporary? Okay, so I don't know my People's Island history. I was going to say they're the same it's the same company as People's Island, but.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Motion to approve. Molly? Second. Heather? May I ask for the vote? All in favor? Any opposed? The item passes and it's approved by unanimous consent.
Thank you. Okay. This is the Lewis N. Jaffe Art Theater Building in New York City. This nomination was prepared with an underrepresented communities grant from the National Park Service and sponsored by the NYS LGBT Historic Sites Project. And the draft was prepared by Amanda Davis and Jay Shockley, and it presents important and still relevant themes in a very moving and meaningful way, and I'm honored to present it to you during Pride. The Yiddish Art Theater was listed on the National Register in 1985 for its association with the history of Yiddish theater in New York City and for its Moorish-inspired design. The period of significance was 1926 to 1950. The primary purpose of this nomination is to document the building's LGBT associations during its use as a live theater venue and as a nightclub, and to add significance for association with the life and work of three exceptionally important LGBT artists, Jackie Curtis, Peter Hujar, and David Wojnarowicz. For those associations, we're adding criterion A in the areas of social history, LGBT, and performing arts, and criteria A, B, and C, and criteria consideration G in the areas of social history, LGBT, and art. And we're extending the period of significance to 1992, and that is a self-portrait of Peter Hujar in the apartment. This is a historic period. I just want to talk about the name change first. Apparently, the original nomination confused the name of the first theater group in the building with the name of the venue. And during its heyday, the theater operated under several different names. Lewis N. Jaffe was the owner and builder of the theater, and LPC chose that name when it designated the building. Our sponsors felt it would bring accuracy and continuity to the listing to rename it, and that the Jaffe was a more appropriate name since the new areas of significance go beyond the history of Jewish theater. So are any questions about the name change? I think that's pretty straightforward. Okay, now I'm going to speed walk through a few decades of background about the Lower East Side. Beginning in the 1950s, just after the Yiddish theater closed, artists, writers, and theater people, beat poets, political activists, and a substantial LGBT population began to discover this neighborhood. The newer residents began to establish the neighborhood's reputation as edgy, artistic, and countercultural. Over the next 2 decades, the 60s and 70s, were characterized by the loss of manufacturing jobs and disinvestment in the neighborhood and an exodus of the traditional immigrant and ethnic population. By the 1980s, the Lower East Side had become the center of an avant-garde punk counterculture and a downtown art scene marked by an explosion of art galleries, music venues, bars, and clubs, many of which catered to the flourishing drag scene. Members of the LGBT community were an accepted presence here as residents, business owners, artists, and playwrights. The downtown art scene flourished for about a decade until it was drastically affected by AIDS, rampant drug use, and the capricious art world. And by the end of the 80s, it was essentially over. The LGBT associations of the Lewis and Jaffe illustrate key themes within this period and context, which encompass two of the most homophobic periods of American history, the post-World War II era and the AIDS crisis. In that half century, people associated with different aspects of the building embodied a wide range of identities within the LGBT community: lesbians, gay men, drag queen kings, female impersonators, and those who might today be identified as gender fluid, gender nonconforming, or transgender. They were among the major players and influence in the downtown art scene, and they are indelibly associated with the neighborhood. This additional documentation provides context for the building's diverse and dynamic social and cultural significance, and it recognizes a variety of people and themes that help to define the importance of the Lower East Side in its heyday. So I have 5 aspects of significance to explain. I've tried to do it briefly. The first of these associations is related to entertainment. Between 1946 and 1951, the building was the location for Club 181, one of the most luxurious clubs in the U.S., featuring female impersonators and a wait staff of drag kings, women dressed as men who also performed. Club 181 was an important and early example of the LGBT nightlife experience. It was also under the control and protection of the mafia, as was Stonewall, if you remember. The mafia protected the club, its performers and patrons, in a conservative era marked by community policing and social control. But this kind of freedom also came with opportunities for exploitation of this community as well. The second association is related to performing arts. From 1953 to 1961, the theater was leased to the newly created Phoenix Theater, an early off-Broadway experimental theater considered one of the most important, prolific, and creative companies of its time. Among its founders were Norris Houghton, shown here, and the intent was to create a theater free from the artistic and economic restrictions of Broadway. The Phoenix welcomed the work of many LGBT authors, composers, lyricists, directors, scenic costumers, lighting designers, and actors, and collectively demonstrated the contributions of the LGBT community to the creation of off-Broadway and to American theater in general. Like Club 81, the theater operated in an intolerant and homophobic period when it was illegal to depict, quote, sexual degeneracy on stage, and subjective judgments could close a theater. Because this fostered a high level of secrecy and invisibility, the identification and recognition of these artists and performers in this nomination is a significant contribution to LGBT history. All right, now we have 3 artists, each of whom lived in the same apartment 3N, sequentially. In each case, this is the most important space associated with his life and work. And I just want to note that all of the photographs of the loft itself here, almost all of them, are attributed to Peter Hujar. So the first artist is Jackie Curtis, who lived here between 1968 and 1973. Curtis was a prolific avant-garde playwright, director, performer, singer, poet, and a Warhol superstar. This is the only apartment he ever lived in on his own. This is where Curtis lived when many of his plays were produced, including some at La Mama, and where his reputation as an influential downtown artist was solidified. His work featured trans and non-binary actors, characters, and themes, and lampooned sexual and social conventions. Curtis was perhaps most influential for the pioneering gender fluid fluid persona that he fully embraced and acknowledged, explaining that my body is my body and my sex is my sex and my ambiguity is my ambiguity, and I cling to that fervently. Curtis never tried to pass as a woman. He expressed the elements of his personality as he understood them and ignored sexual or gender identity labels. His singular style of drag was unusual at the time when most performers strove for realness, but it was widely copied, and he is cited as an inspiration for glam rock. Curtis was legendary in the East Village, and in 1972, he and other Warhol superstars were immortalized in Lou Reed's song Walk on the Wild Side. He was a model of true authenticity, expressed in another quote of his: "Not a boy, not a girl, not a faggot, not a drag queen, not a transsexual, just me, Jackie." The second artist is Peter Hujar, who followed Curtis into the loft, living there from 1973 until his death in 1987. Hujar began as a freelance photographer. About the time he moved into this apartment, he abandoned that to devote himself full-time to art. He fully developed his craft in this apartment, creating a darkroom and studio and taking many of his most acclaimed portraits in that space, using the concrete floor and bare wall as the primary setting for his photos. He also developed the skills to be the master printer of his own work, most of which consisted of black and white photographs of artists, some of whom were legendary figures in their own right, such as Candy Darling, Merce Cunningham, Susan Sontag, Fran Lebowitz, and William S. Burroughs. He also took a great many self-portraits here, as well as photos of artist David Wojnarowicz. Hujar's environment was small and restricted. He gravitated to people who chose occupations that existed in the margins: poet, artist, drag performer. But he chronicled their lives as well as the creative world of the village in impeccably beautiful works that used light to imbue them with unearthly qualities. This is his photo of actor and performance artist Ethel Eichelberger as Nefertiti. Hujar was a towering figure in the East Village, where he served as a parental figure for up-and-coming artists, most importantly David Wojnarowicz. These two formed an intellectual and familial bond that may have been the most important influence on either man's art. Hujar died of AIDS in 1987. His friends held a memorial in the apartment itself with his portraits on the walls. He was only partially recognized in his own time, but since his death, he has been acknowledged as one of the greatest American photographers of the 20th century. His work now hangs in the galleries of the Met, the Whitney, the Getty, the Walker, and many other important museums. And finally, David Wojnarowicz. He lived there from 1987 until 1982. He moved into the apartment following Hujar's death and lived there until his own death from AIDS. And on the right is a self-portrait in the apartment itself. Wojnarowicz was an angry, radical political firebrand who challenged the art world and took America to task for its lack of response to the AIDS crisis. He lived a life of extreme hardship, which he channeled into multimedia art, photography, filmmaking, writing, music, performance, and activism. He gravitated to the East Village, where he found outsiders like himself, beginning as a street artist, spray painting cars, buildings, and streets. He met Hujar in 1980, and the latter acted as an unequaled source of support and inspiration. Wojnarowicz's art turned to art full-time in 1982. Like Hujar, he took inspiration from the peers and the gay life he found there. His themes were often homosexuals arming themselves against the government's intrusion into their sex lives. And as his art grew more complex, so did its subject matter, which became a commentary on an exclusionary American culture. He was greatly impacted by Hujar's death and moved into the loft to continue to breathe the same air. Diagnosed with AIDS himself, he spent the rest of his short life railing against the AIDS-fueled backlash against sexual activity among gay and bisexual men. In his last years, he used the disease as a weapon in his art and his writings, raging against American indifference, paranoia, hatred, bigotry, and homophobia. After he died in the loft in 1992, his friends opened the loft to mourn and to plan a political funeral, which was held 1 week later, organized by ACT UP and People with AIDS. A procession began at the theater and marched under a banner that read, David Wojnarowicz, 1954, 1992, died of AIDS due to government neglect. Today, he is revered in the art world and his work remains strikingly relevant. The heart of his message about exclusion, homophobia, and social injustice can be summarized in another quote of his, if I die, it is because a handful of people in power believe I am expendable. We have a letter of support from LPC and another letter from Assembly Member Deborah Glick. And I believe we have a few of our sponsors on the phone, but I'm not sure who. Ken, Amanda, Jay, would anyone like to add anything? And Amanda, Jay? No, you unmute.
Yeah, this is Amanda. I don't know if Jay wants to talk as the main author of this one, but I'll just quickly add, thank you, Kath, for this presentation, and always want to continue. Thank you, the continued support of the New York State Historic Preservation Board, and looking at these nominations and New York State continuing to be a leader with LGBTQ nominations across the country, especially in these times. And I was particularly just with this building, we were really struck how over the decades, as Kath mentioned, from post-World War II up until the AIDS crisis, the different layers of LGBTQ history represented in this building. And Hujar and Wojnarowicz in particular, looking at their relationship with that space, what it meant to them, how their influence reverberated into the neighborhood. And building in their time here really represents an era of the East Village that was lost, largely lost because of AIDS and gentrification. I also just want to thank Jane Beck and the folks at the David Wojnarowicz Foundation, who are familiar with Wojnarowicz and Peter Hujar, who knew them, who knew the space, and really helped flesh out what the space was like in that period. So thank you, everyone, and happy Pride.
As the primary author of this nomination, I just want to add to Amanda's remarks that our project is celebrating 10 years now, unbelievably. And of all of the buildings that we have worked on in New York City, the 5 boroughs, we now have 500 sites on our website. This building is the single most complex building we've ever researched. It just has layer after layer after layer after layer of LGBT history.
And I want to thank Kath. This is Ken Lusbader from the project. Kath and our colleagues at the State Historic Preservation Office have been amazing and really the sort of emotional and professional boosters of keeping us going over the past 10 years and making New York State the leader in the documentation of LGBTQ site-based history. And I believe we do have someone on from the David Wojnarowicz Foundation, which is great to see. And I know that the Peter Hujar estate and foundation is supportive of this and thanked us this morning for doing this, as well as Jackie Curtis's cousin, who's written a book about Curtis and her influence in the American theater and New York City culture.
Thank you, all 3 of you, buddies.
Any questions or comments? Gretchen?
This is Gretchen Soren. This one for me was one of the most refreshing applications to read this time, because in thinking about telling the complete story of New York's history, it was such a departure from the fancy people and fancy houses and fancy architects that is the vast majority of what's on the National Register. And I just thought this was an incredibly important nomination, and great job, really great job.
I got into it as I got into it and read the drafts as they were revised. I got more and more. I was moved by it. The layers. I wasn't sure how I was going to get it all. Well, we all weren't sure how we were going to get it all into a nomination. But I think they did a wonderful job.
Excellent. Molly?
Hi, can you hear me? This is Molly Garfinkel. I just want to, again, I want to amplify what Gretchen said, and also, Kath, what you said. This is such an incredibly moving nomination. It is so deeply important, especially at this moment, to have this record as the nomination itself identifies. I actually think that's really powerful to have that sort of meta self-recognition of what the purpose of adding these names, calling out histories and experiences, accomplishments, challenges, is really important. So I really appreciated that also. And just wanted to say to you, Kath, Amanda, Jay, Ken, thank you for all the very inspiring and hard work that you continue to do. This is really critical work.
Thank you. Molly.
Wint?
This is Wint. It seems to me that in the nomination, there was reference made to an appendix that listed the various plays produced by the Phoenix Theater. I can remember going to some of those plays when it was uptown in the East 70s, I guess. It was after this period, and I knew Norris Houghton slightly. But I didn't see the appendix. Is it?
You didn't get the appendix?
What?
You didn't get the appendix? There were 3 or 4 appendices.
Well, I'll look again. I thought that
Okay, I thought
looked.
I put them all, I remember attaching them all.
All right. Well, anyway,
Again, later I can send it to you.
it was very good theater. I mean, it was really, I don't know if it was avant-garde necessarily. I think it wasn't. Sometimes it was standard, but the performances were terrific and the actors acting.
Jay's the expert on the theater part.
Yes, trust me, there was a complete production history that was one of the appendices.
You know, can I, one thing, Jay and Kath, I wanted to add as part of the process, Jay originally did a deep dive trying to make a connection with the Yiddish theater and the LGBTQ experience and community. But he then researched an extraordinary number of sites, productions that were affiliated with the theater, none that were, directly LGBTQ. So we couldn't make that sort of a theme or part of the criteria. But I just want to sort of acknowledge Jay's sort of deep dive into that.
We wanted you to have that, so we put it, all those in the appendices.
Right.
And I hope you got that because I distinctly, after I got the letter from Assembly Member Glick last night at 5 o'clock, I also sent her the nomination. I thought she would enjoy it. So.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Do I hear a motion to? Oh, okay.
I'll make the motion. This is Gretchen Soren.
Is there a second? Molly? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the vote is approved. The nomination has received. Oh, all the vote. Yes. May I please hear the vote?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The matter is approved with a unanimous consent. Thank you. And one more before lunch, 2 more before lunch. Jeff, if you would please come forward.
All right. I actually have 3 nominations to present, beginning with St. Peter's Church in Manhattan. So St. Peter's Church, located at 619 Lexington Avenue in Manhattan, is an exceptionally significant work of late 20th century modern architecture. The church is locally and nationally significant under Criterion C in the areas of art and architecture, and meets criteria consideration A for religious properties. Further, it is a masterwork of architecture, interior design, and art. Hugh Stubbins, the church's architect, played a central role in the proliferation of the international style in the United States. The church's interior is one of only 2 intact total environments in the United States by world-renowned designers Massimo and Lella Vignelli, and it is a particularly excellent example of the Vignelli canon of design. The Nevelson Chapel is an iconic example of acclaimed sculptor Louise Nevelson's whitework and her only extant total environment. The period of significance is 1974 to 1977. It begins with the groundbreaking for the church in April 1974 and extends to 1977, the year construction was completed. The property is situated in the Midtown East neighborhood, bound by 59th Street to the north, 5th Avenue to the west, 40th Street to the south, and 3rd Avenue to the east. The streets bordering the property are lined in high-rise office buildings with commercial retail space at the street level. St. Peter's is one of 3 interlocking buildings that comprise the City Core Center complex, the others being City Core Center Tower and a stepped 6-story market building. Although the church remains tenuously interconnected with the City Core complex, with many of those connections being severed post-September 11th, the nomination and boundary focus only on the church itself, reflecting its separation of use, level of artistic design, and areas of significance. The congregation's history is bound up in the zoning changes and real estate transactions that defined the development of Midtown Manhattan, culminating in the construction of a new church, which replaced the former Gothic Revival building pictured here. When First National City Bank decided to pursue consolidation of the entire city block bounded by Lexington Avenue, 54th Street, 3rd Avenue, and 53rd Street for construction of their new corporate headquarters, St. Peter's, led by their ambitious young pastor, Reverend Ralph Peterson, voted to enter a condominium agreement with the bank. The condominium agreement enabled St. Peter's to move beyond simply renovating their former building or relocating to start anew. They were able to remain active participants in decisions about the site's shared public spaces and to envision a new worship space that clearly reflected their values and mission as a congregation without being displaced. And the image on the right features Ralph Peterson sitting on the rubble of the Gothic Revival building before the new St. Peter's Church is constructed. Rebuilding St. Peter's Church was an opportunity to create a new facility that both communicated and facilitated Reverend Peterson's progressive ideas about what a modern church should be and how it should relate to modern people through the visual, musical, and performing arts of their own time. The church is distinguished within the complex by its Caledonia granite exterior, and its form is intended to approximate 2 hands folded in prayer, with the skylight the space between. The most used entrance to the church is located on East 54th Street and features the St. Peter's Cross, which is designed by Vignelli Associates. The 54th Street entrance opens directly into the north side of the narthex, which is also used as gallery space. And the living room below is an open, flexible space that feels like an extension of the narthex. Moving into the sanctuary, well, Hugh Stubbins Associates is responsible for the church's iconic form. The Vignellis imbued it with its character. Lella and Massimo Vignelli were Italian designers known for their minimal aesthetic and strict adherence to modernism. And Vignelli Associates is most recognized for their design of the 1972 New York City subway map. In addition to St. Peter's graphic program and the church interiors, the Vignellis designed all liturgical furnishings and artifacts for the sanctuary. The organ, located at the northwest corner of the sanctuary, was designed by the Vignellis in collaboration with Claes Orgelblau of Germany. The Vignellis' design for the organ's console, bench, and case integrate seamlessly into the sanctuary, matching its other wood furnishings. Because most of their architectural designs were corporate office interiors, showrooms, and exhibitions, which are inherently temporary, St. Peter's is one of only 2 fully intact architectural works by Vignelli Associates. The Nevelson Chapel is sculptor Louise Nevelson's only extant total environment. The chapel is one of only 3 permanent installations in Nevelson's archetypal medium of wood, and it is the only one of the 3 that constitutes a total artistic environment, approximating the installations she created for gallery exhibitions during her lifetime. Finally, St. Peter's is locally significant for its role in fostering the advancements of modern sacred art in New York City and for making such art accessible to a wider public. The architecture of St. Peter's was shaped by and for New York City's arts community, providing a ground for novel interventions in the visual arts, jazz, and theater. This slide depicts some images of St. Peter's jazz program with Duke Ellington featured on the left. This is St. Peter's Church. This honorary nomination was prepared by Caitlin Watson, Senior Project Architect at Anda Architects. We received 9 letters of support, including from Docomomo US, the Vignelli Center for Design Studies, the Magazzino Italian Art and Research Center, members of the St. Peter's Congregation, and the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, which is a certified local government. And Caitlin Watson and Jared Stoller, who is St. Peter's Senior Pastor, I believe are with us and would like to make a few remarks. Caitlin, if you're on the call, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Watson, and as an architect living in New York City, I get asked what my favorite building is or what people should go and visit while they're here quite a lot, and I always direct folks to St. Peter's. And this is why it's been such an honor and a pleasure for me to work with the church on their nomination for listing on the state and national registers. For 10 years, I've been researching and writing about artist-designed chapels, from the Matisse Chapel in France to the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas. And this led to a larger exploration of the emergence of a particular type of space, the sacred public, which emerged in the United States from a fusion of a specific set of ideals about ecumenism with modern art and architecture to create spaces that are open to all and also operate outside of capitalist economic motivations. And in 2018, I began studying the Nevelson Chapel at St. Peter's Church as a part of this larger study, and realized quite quickly how significant the church is as a whole, as a reflection of the integration of faith, the arts, and culture to serve new and diverse publics within a fluctuating urban realm. And the city is so fortunate that the Congregation of St. Peter's has done as much as they have to steward and protect this very special place. And listing on the register will really recognize and support their efforts into the future so that we can make sure that it remains a vibrant public space for all for decades to come.
Thank you, Caitlin. Jared, you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this nomination. It's heartily supported by the people of St. Peter's. I can say that in my 20 years here at St. Peter's, first as an intern and then as a vicar, then associate pastor, now senior pastor, it's been a great gift to get to know the people who helped to shape this place back in the 1970s. Sadly, many of them have died in these past 20 years, and I see it not only as my own personal mission, but very much the congregation sees it as vital to their mission to ensure that their legacies and the legacy of this place continues for the future. And this nomination would certainly go a long way to do that. As Caitlin mentioned, as Jeff spoke, St. Peter's had this opportunity in the 70s to create something that was not for themselves, but was for this city. That's what we have maintained it as for now almost 50 years, and want to ensure that it is for many, 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 many years to come. And so this nomination very much in line with that original founding idea and our driving momentum even today. And finally, just to say that this is for the public, and we're glad to have these public art installations, but it's mad. below me, our older adult center is meeting right now in the living room. And so I'm aware how special and how integral this place is to so many people in their everyday walk of life. And we also hope that that will continue for many, many years to come and see this nomination as consonant. So we support it, and we're very grateful for it. Thanks to you all.
Thank you, Jared. Any questions?
I'd like to move and thank everybody who was involved in nominating this place. Can't wait to visit it. I'm Fabiana Chio Rinaldi, and thank you for bringing to our attention the integration of arts and faith. Very well done. Moving.
Thank you, Fabiano. Are there any questions or comments besides that?
This is Wind. I'm ashamed to say that I've passed that building, I suppose 100 times or 200 times. I never went in, and I never realized its consequential importance. I too want to pay it a visit very soon. I'd be happy to move it.
Molly has a comment.
Molly Garfinkel, I agree with everything that Fabian and Wood just said, and also just wanted to commend you on a really elegant weaving of zoning history and city development history and corporate history into the totally textured and fascinating history of art, architecture, and faith. So that was really well done.
Okay, then Fabiano has moved the item. Wint, you have the second. May I have the vote, please? Do I have a motion to approve?
Aye.
Thank you. We're set to go. Then the item is approved with unanimous consent.
Want to do lunch now?
Lunch now?
Okay, works for me.
All right, we'll pause and have our half-hour lunch, and Jeff will be back. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's that time to reconvene our meeting after our lunch and continue with our National Register nomination reviews. So Jeff, you take it away, please.
So we're moving to Sag Harbor and the John Steinbeck cottage, located at 2 Bluff Point Lane in Sag Harbor, and is locally and nationally significant under Criterion B in the area of literature for its association with the last period of American writer John Steinbeck's life and literary career. The period of significance begins in 1955, when Steinbeck and his wife Elaine purchased the property, and ends with Steinbeck's death in 1968. And it's important to note that Steinbeck's house in Monte Sereno, California, was listed in the National Register in 1989. While residing there from 1936 to 1938, Steinbeck wrote 2 of his most significant works, The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men. And Steinbeck's birthplace and boyhood home in Salinas, California, was also listed in the National Register in 2000. These properties represent Steinbeck's early life and career and the influence of California on his writing, whereas the Sag Harbor property embodies his later literary career and the impact of Sag Harbor upon it. The property is located on a 1.29 acre parcel situated at the westerly tip of Bluff Point. It is bounded by water on 2 sides, Morris Cove to the south and Upper Sag Harbor Cove to the west, and contains 6 contributing resources, 4 buildings and 2 structures. All resources from the period of Steinbeck's ownership and occupancy survive and include a modest summer cottage constructed circa 1930 prior to Steinbeck's occupancy. And this is an interior view of the cottage that features an original stone fireplace. A dock that extends into Morris Cove, constructed circa 1930, and a garage and workshop constructed 1955. And this building briefly served as Steinbeck's writing studio Before he constructed a hexagonal writer's studio nicknamed Joyous Gard, a reference to Arthurian legend, more specifically the name of Sir Lancelot's castle, in 1958. A guest cottage for Steinbeck's sons constructed in 1962, and an oblong-shaped swimming pool installed in 1965 as a gift for Elaine. It was during Steinbeck's time in Sag Harbor that he wrote his last three critically acclaimed works: The Winter of Our Discontent in 1961, Travels with Charlie in Search of America in 1962, and America and Americans in 1966. The first earning him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1962 and reaffirming his reputation as a writer of international renown and significance. And during this period, Steinbeck and Elaine did maintain an apartment in New York City, but Sag Harbor is where he did his writing. Steinbeck penned all three of these works, collectively known as the Sag Harbor Trilogy, in his writing studio, Joyous Gard. And the picture on the left shows Steinbeck with Charlie, who was his poodle, with the cottage in the background. Far from abandoning the scenes and sources that informed his earlier fiction, Steinbeck discovered a comparable location in Sag Harbor in which to live and write. The village was not only reminiscent of the familiar Salinas Valley and Monterey, California towns of his youth, but was also a place animated with historic themes and authentic characters that reignited his imagination. The significance of the John Steinbeck cottage in Sag Harbor is therefore due to the resource that the village served in Steinbeck's writing, and for the fact that the place provided him with inspiration and a quiet retreat in which to pursue his late writing career. And the image on the left is Steinbeck in front of the writing studio, and you can see the name Joyous Gard. And then at the threshold, he placed these brass tacks that say "Aroint," which is another reference to our Arthurian legend, and it means go away or be gone. This is the John Steinbeck cottage. This honorary nomination was prepared by historic preservation consultant Zachary N. Studenroth. We received 4 letters of support, including from the village of Sag Harbor, which is a certified local government. And I think Zach might be online. And Zach, if you are, you can unmute and make a few comments. Or we can move on to questions.
Questions or comments while we await Zach?
This is Wint. I believe I read that the property has been bought from the Steinbeck estate recently by the village for $13 million. Amazing for a small community to raise that kind of money. Is to be a writer's studio, as you said. But an impressive sense of commitment to somebody who obviously loved the place. There was one place in the write-up that was rather a misleading statement. It said that during the McCarthy era, he was investigated. Steinbeck was investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee, and they investigated his un-American activities. If ever there was a writer who had no un-American activities, it was Steinbeck. I think it should be said that they were alleged un-American activities.
Thank you, Wynn. I think that's a good nuance to point out.
Any other questions or comments?
May I comment? My name is Diana Howard.
Oh, yes, absolutely, Diana.
I am the co-president of our Steinbeck Local Advisory Board, and we now own the property. I just wanted to correct one thing. It was a nonprofit that raised the money to purchase the property, and we did it with community preservation funds from the town of Southampton. So they were really the biggest individual donor. And then we had a state grant from the state of New York. And then we raised the rest of the funds through private donations. The property is now owned by our local nonprofit, and we have partnered with the Michener Center for Writers at the University of Texas, and that's the entity that runs the Writers Retreat at the home.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you. That's a good clarification.
I wanted the town of Southampton to get their due because they used a lot of their community preservation funds to help us with this.
Any other comments, questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve. This is Heather.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second.
Wint, thank you. Are there any abstentions? Let me call the vote. Those in favor? Opposed? None? Then the nomination is approved with unanimous consent. Thank you. Jeff, keep going.
And finally, we have High House and Studio located at 7134 Indian Neck Lane in South Hole, New York, which is significant under criterion B in the area of art for its association with artist couple Edith Mitchell Prellwitz and Henry Prellwitz. The Prellwitzes were leading figures in the Peconic art colony and were known for their impressionist, figurative, and landscape paintings. Edith Prellwitz is also significant for her work to advance women's involvement and opportunities in the art world. The period of significance begins in 1913 when the Prellwitzes became year-round residents of the property and ends in 1944 with the death of Edith Prellwitz. The property is located on a 4.41 acre parcel of land on the North Fork of Long Island in the hamlet of Peconic, and is bound by Indian Neck Lane to the north and east, Peconic Bay to the south, and residential properties to the west. It contains 4 buildings, a residence named High House, constructed circa 1814 and moved to its current site in 1911, a studio building constructed 1911 to 1912, and 2 frame outbuildings, which are non-contributing. Edith Mitchell Prellwitz was born in 1864 in South Orange, New Jersey. In 1883, she enrolled in the Art Students League of New York, where she completed her formal training as a painter and later studied in Europe. Along with several other women painters, she formed the Women's Art Club of New York, which became the National Association of Women Artists. She married fellow painter Henry Prellwitz in 1894. Henry was born in 1865 in New York City and studied at City College of New York, the Art Students League of New York, and in Paris from 1887 to 1890. Peconic's early 20th century community was a haven for artistic professionals, and the Prellwitzes became central figures in the Peconic art colony, a professional and social group of local artists. In 1911, the couple purchased a circa 1814 Dutch colonial-style house and had it deconstructed and shipped 20 miles by barge to Indian Neck, where it was reassembled on a then-vacant lot Edith inherited from her father. At the time, the Prellwitzes also had a building to house their respective studios constructed on the property. This is a contemporary exterior view of High House and an interior view of the main living space with a mantel that features one of Edith's paintings entitled The Open Door. And this is a current exterior view of the studio building. And Edith and Henry had distinct but complementary styles. though they worked independently for most of their careers, as evidenced by their separate studios. And this slide features an image of Edith, her studio space in the building, and then one of her Peconic-themed landscape paintings. And Edith's early figurative work focused on portraits of working class people, and her later portrait painting turned to images of mothers and children. Henry was more noted as a landscape painter, and the couple's paintings were widely exhibited and won acclaim in important shows. Edith was the first woman to win the second Hallgarten Prize at the National Academy of Design, and paintings by both artists belong to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Prelwitzes had several other residences over the course of their lives and careers, including in Cornish, New Hampshire, and New York City, but High House is the place where they felt most at home, and Peconic was a frequent source of inspiration for their paintings. Henry died in 1940, Edith in 1944, and the Peconic Art Colony, whose members are pictured here, disbanded soon after. This is High House and Studio. This honorary nomination was prepared by Wendy Prelwitz, who is the great-granddaughter of Edith and Henry Prelwitz. And we received 2 letters of support, and I believe Wendy is online with us. So Wendy, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello?
We can hear you, Wendy. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, you might notice that I'm sitting in Edith's studio. You see the background behind me. I just want to say thank you so much, Jeff, for preparing such a thoughtful presentation. I'm so excited that the house and studios and Henry and Edith are being considered. They were quite a couple, you know, they were really different temperamentally. Henry apparently was quite a bon vivant, and he was very involved in the arts community in his day. Very involved at the Art Students League, where he was president. He was the treasurer of the National Academy, but yet he found time to paint. He painted classical paintings, submitted to exhibitions of the day, won prizes, but he also really loved the local landscape out here after they moved this house and started living here. And he painted outdoors quite a bit, and I just have always loved the freshness of his paintings. Edith was from a very different background, a sort of illustrious New York society family, whereas Henry was the son of immigrants from Prussia who lived on the Lower East Side, running a cigar store. But they made quite a couple. She was dedicated from the get-go. You know, she was a young woman with ambition and decided to pursue this world in the arts despite maybe what her society and family upbringing would have kind of frowned upon, but in the end they were supportive of her. And she won many prizes, often the first woman to win the prize, let's say from the National Academy. As Jeff mentioned, she started the Women's Art Club, which still is the National Association of Women Artists. She's really an early feminist. And she had a wide range of interests. She was a portraitist, often of women and children, sort of a la Mary Cassatt. She was quite skilled painter. But she was also an intellectual, spiritual woman who painted symbolist paintings. And I am in awe of both of them. I am also a painter. I'm inspired. You know, Edith broke a lot of boundaries, and I'm so proud of her, especially because she's on the wall with 2 paintings in the Metropolitan Museum, which is just kind of like, you know, you go, girl. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Wendy.
Sure.
Any questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Gretchen. Is there a second? Molly? Any abstentions? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, the nomination is approved with unanimous consent. And Jonathan, please come forward.
Well, after Jeff's illustrious cultural properties, I'm here to bring you back to everyday people and everyday places. Our first property to look at today is the Peleg White House, and we may have an amendment on the name, which I will get to in a minute. As submitted, the Peleg White House is eligible for the National Register under criterion C for architecture as a highly intact example of a distinctive 1830s local adaptation of the traditional New England hall and parlor plan house, which, due to the arrival of stove heating, the central stair has been substituted for the massive chimney. Its period of significance is circa 1836, which is the date of construction. The initial naming of the application for the house was in the name of its patron and one of its first inhabitants, local Quaker entrepreneur in the medicinal balm business, Peleg White. A suggestion from just this Monday from the Ledyard Town historian was that we rename this the Peleg and Eunice White House. And I was favorable to this amendment because, of course, Peleg and his wife lived in the house together, and we're talking about the Quaker tradition. She would have been viewed very much as co-equal, and there is evidence that she participated equally in the family business. And then I went and dug up Peleg White's will, and it turns out he died in 1838, and she lived in the house 4 more years than he did. So I ran this by the owner and the consultant. They are both favorable to the amendment. So I'm going to put it forth to the Park Service as the Peleg and Eunice White House. As long as you all approve, of course. The house lies on a rural lot in the town of Ledyard, and the boundaries are its currently associated lot, which is historically the house yard. The house itself, as you see, is relatively plain on the exterior, apart from the small portico, the door surround, and the gable fans. Stylistic features of the ornamental joinery are transitional, federal, and Greek revival, and really very much of their time of the 1830s. In addition to the attenuated proportions of the front porch and door, the art surround at the base of the stair and the vaulted ceiling of the stair relate to the federal taste. Some of the interior door moldings are a simplification of plate 48 of Asher Benjamin's The Practical House Carpenter of 1830. The orthogonal nature of the door surround and the more muscular proportions of interior moldings and the mantelpiece, particularly in terms of its pilasters, do point forward to the Greek revival. The quatrefoils on the mantelpieces are apparently a flourish of local joiners' whimsy, but original doors, built-in shelves, original chair rails, baseboards, and door and window moldings and unusual stairs with their intact rails and balusters all contribute to the building's high level of integrity, of workmanship, of design, integrity of workmanship, design, and materials. This nomination was prepared by Robley Historical Preservation. The intent of this commercial tax credit project is to rehabilitate this as overflow lodging for a local hotelier. There is correspondence in support of this application from the Ledyard town historian, who, as I said, corrected our name for us in very large extent. So that is the Peleg White House. Are there any questions?
I guess to me, the obvious.
Erica, please use the mic.
Oh, sorry. When you started to talk about the name change, I thought perhaps there was going to be reference to calling it the Yellow House, or are they planning on painting it and turning it into the White House?
Oh. No, it's just named after the Peleg White and his wife Eunice. Yeah.
Any other questions? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve? Heather beat you to it. Heather moved it first. Winch, you get the second. Are there any abstentions? We will vote then. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Well, that nomination is approved with unanimous consent. Please proceed, Jonathan.
Okay.
Okay, a note about this one. This one we postponed last time because there was an objection. There are two owners, the owner of the church and church buildings and the owner of the high school, who is a tax credit applicant. We accidentally notified the diocese instead of the pastor last time. My mistake. I assumed most Catholic churches were owned by a diocese. In fact, that's not true in this diocese. So the pastor sent us a letter saying that he did not want to be included, and we postponed it in order to give us a chance to talk to him and explain that the National Register wouldn't hamper anything he wanted to do. And I sent him a letter explaining that, apologizing and suggesting that he meet with Dan and me over the summer to talk about it. He didn't respond to that letter. So a few weeks, we told him it would be on the agenda again. A few weeks ago, I sent him a direct email pointing out that he hadn't responded, but that it was going to the board, and suggesting we have a phone call and telling him we were available for, all week, and any time that he could talk to us, we'd be happy to spend time with him. Didn't respond to that either. And so here we are. He said he didn't know about this, but the tax credit applicant said he did. We've done our best to notify him and to be polite and to give him every opportunity to talk to us. However, if one objects and one is in favor, that's not a majority, so he cannot stop the nomination. And we do have a tax credit application that needs to be completed. So any questions about that?
Does it mean that the church property itself would go on the register? Even
Can't list
even with his objection?
Yes, because 1 and 1 is not a majority. So it will be listed. He suggested we list just the school. The school is not individually eligible, and also it's not Park Service policy to pull something out of an historic functionally related complex like that, historically and functionally related complex. I also told him that a lot of churches in central New York were doing this, for example, selling their building, and then he might apply for sacred sites funds or whatever, but didn't give us a chance to talk to him, so I don't know what else to do.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, then do I have a motion to approve?
You didn't do it yet.
Oh, Jonathan, I'm sorry.
I need to present the property. Okay.
I'm jumping ahead, forgive me.
All right. So, St. Stephen's Roman Catholic Church and its associated buildings, an elementary school, a rectory, and a high school, are eligible under criterion C for architecture, as they represent fine examples of an assortment of early and mid-20th century architectural styles. The period of significance runs from the 1910 construction of the church to the 1962 completion of the final phase of construction of the high school. As Geneva's second parish, St. Stephen's was able to add buildings to its complex gradually as the needs and priorities of the religious community demanded, resulting in a diversity of design that spans more than 50 years of parish growth and architectural change. The buildings lie on adjacent suburban lots west of downtown Geneva, with the church, rectory, and elementary school lying on Pulteney Street between Elmwood Avenue and High Street, and the high school sitting just across High Street from the church. The firm of Gordon and Madden designed the finely detailed late Gothic Revival church, which was built by local contractor Rhoda Hogan between 1910 and 1912. Notable features include hammer beam vaults and fine stained glass windows. To this, the parish added a Tudor Revival elementary school, which later acquired a modern rear addition. Ira Edgar Hill, locally known for his work on the Hobart College campus, supplied the design for the rambling Tudor Revival parsonage in 1924. The complex was completed by the DeSales High School, which, although begun in 1929, was not finished until 1962, when the Rochester-based firm of Flynn and Bohackett gave the building its final form. The building's stripped-down modern appearance, albeit one informed by classically derived proportions, contrasts with the rest of the complex. This nomination was prepared by Katie Stuck of Preservation Studios. This is a commercial tax credit project, with the high school being converted into apartments. And as noted previously, there is a letter opposing the nomination.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve? Gretchen, a second. Molly, any abstentions? Hearing none, we'll move to the vote. The nomination is approved with unanimous consent. Oh, we have to vote. Will you please vote? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? None. Now the nomination is approved with unanimous consent. Thank you.
Okay, for the rest of my time, we're going to be in downtown Buffalo. We are starting right off the highway bypass. We will pass these buildings as you come off the highway as you're headed west. And then we will head from there to Niagara Street, with 3 properties just going right up Niagara Street. So you could see these 4 properties all easily in an hour as you kind of drive through downtown Buffalo. So our first of the Buffalo properties is a small district, the commercial buildings at 136 to 142 Seneca Street. These are significant under criterion A for commerce, as a small streetscape that preserves the character and historical associations of the once densely packed mercantile neighborhood that grew up immediately south of downtown Buffalo in the 3rd quarter of the 19th century. The period of significance runs from the construction of the first of these buildings around 1865 to 1958, when adjacent demolitions comprised the character of the rest of the neighborhood. The buildings lie on 3 contiguous urban lots on the south side, or on the north side rather, of Seneca Street, immediately east of the I-190 off-ramp onto Elm Street. The 2 smaller buildings at 136 and 138 were built speculatively to earn rental income and initially housed clothing-related businesses. 140 to 142 Seneca, on the other hand, served as a fine bakery and confectionery. The 3 buildings were notable survivors of the Great Fire of 1889, which was Buffalo's most significant conflagration to that date. Firefighting efforts saved them from destruction faced by buildings both across the street and on the same block. On the image on your right here, you can see essentially in the upper right, you have a bunch of shaded buildings. The shading actually shows in this newspaper illustration the buildings that burned. Two of our buildings actually had their facades damaged. So you'll notice there's some shading along the front of the street, but not on the sides. So these are the survivors of the Great Fire, which adds a little bit of interest to their history. The storefronts notably, the shop fronts notably retained their original cast iron frames, at least one of which was produced by local Buffalo foundry Bingham and Morgan. The commercial buildings and uses of the commercial uses of the buildings chart the fortunes of the neighborhoods over time as well. In 1905, 136 Seneca became a pawn shop, which would remain its function through the 1970s. And while a shoe store occupied 138 Seneca from 1903 to 1928, thereafter the store space was relegated to a series of discount and secondhand commercial endeavors. A series of restaurants and saloons, with the emphasis increasingly on the latter function, and a hotel occupied 140 to 142 Seneca in the 20th century. Aside from this little group of buildings, the historic fabric of the entire neighborhood was destroyed in the mid to late 20th century to make way for the Niagara branch of the New York State Thruway, I-190, and other urban renewal era projects. This nomination was prepared by KTA preservation specialists. This is a commercial tax credit project with the intent to have first floor commercial space and residential units above, just like it was used historically.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Molly, second. Heather? Let me call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Thank you then. The nomination is approved with unanimous consent. Jonathan?
Okay, now we're headed up Niagara Street, up the hill on Niagara Street. So we start at the bottom with the Manzi block. The Manzi block at 461 to 471 Niagara Street is eligible for the National Register under Criterion C for architecture as a notable example of 1920s tapestry brick clad two-story, two-part commercial block typology. Its period of significance is the construction date of the building, 1923. It lies on the front of an urban lot on the corner of Seneca and Hudson Streets. The building was constructed in 1923 following designs by architect Charles Forrest. The first floor commercial spaces pretty much retained their original dimensions, except for the one on the corner at the bottom right here, which was enlarged to encompass two storefronts. The plans of the apartments above are essentially intact. The facade sports tapestry brick veneer consisting of large panels of brick laid in stretcher bronze set in frames of header, soldier, and row-lock bricks in red and yellow. The building is actually the last addition to a real estate enterprise of Italian immigrant landlord Thomas Manzi, who purchased a lot that extended from Niagara all the way back to Prospect Avenue in 1915, converted an already extant mid-19th century Italianate villa on the site to office and commercial space. You see it on the right there. It is now gone. And then he constructed 4 rental houses on the Prospect Avenue side. The Manzi block's good integrity exceptional size. It is 6 storefronts wide, and polychrome patterning lends its status as an exemplar among comparable buildings in Buffalo. The shop spaces are largely legible in their open volumes, and though some have experienced fire damage, some shops feature original press tin ceilings. The apartments all remain fairly intact, both in trim and plan. This nomination was prepared by Alexander Wydell of Johnson Smith and Associates. This is a commercial tax credit project with the intent that the building is being rehabilitated to serve its historical purpose as a mixed-use commercial and multi-family residential building.
Are there any questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? Second. Any abstentions? Let's call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you then. The item is approved by unanimous consent.
Fabiana,
Fabiana was the
mover.
the mover, and Gretchen was the seconder.
Okay, we're headed about halfway up the hill on Niagara Street. By the way, these properties are all on the right as you're going from downtown up Niagara. This is the Plater King Feldhausen House. The Plater King Feldhausen House at 617 Niagara Street in Buffalo is significant under criterion C for architecture as a residence exhibiting a high degree of craftsmanship that was built and modified by 3 different owners within the second half of the 19th century to conform to successive waves of architectural taste. The period of significance runs from the building's original construction in 1854 to its last major addition in 1889. The house sits on the northeastern side of Niagara in the middle of the block between Jersey and Porter Avenue. Originally constructed as a 2-story Italianate style single-family residence for the Charles G. Plater family, the house was later transformed into a 2.5-story Second Empire influenced residence when residents added a mansard roof sometime between 1870 and 1889. The finely fashioned interior and exterior features exhibit Greek Revival, Italianate Second Empire aesthetic movement, and Queen Anne stylistic influence. The entry hall attests both to the original period of the house and some later phases of alteration. The door surrounds are Greek Revival, the stair balusters are Italianate, and the Ionic newel post is Queen Anne. On the northern side of the house, Greek Revival trim and Italianate mantelpieces predominate. On the south, some later alterations like Neo-Greek door surrounds and the eccentric, perhaps even Egyptian Revival influenced mantel on the ground floor predominate. This division is also apparent on the second floor, with an Italianate marble on the north and an elaborate aesthetic movement mantelpiece with mirrored overmantel showing the updating of the south rooms in the later phase of alterations. The carriage house at the rear of the property was built circa 1889. This nomination was prepared by KTA preservation specialists. This is a commercial tax credit project where the rehabilitation was mainly to maintain the features of the building to serve its current function as multifamily residential.
Any questions or comments?
I just have a comment. Can we go back to the slide where you had the staircases with that amazing floor? Because I did not see that in the original pictures that I was looking. Yes.
Yeah, the parquet floor. Yes.
Parquet floor over there. The pattern there is just amazing. That is gorgeous. Sorry, that is amazing.
Well, I'll have another Second Empire house for you maybe the end of the year, and it also has parquet floors you could admire. So.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, is the motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Heather, the second.
I'll second. Erica.
Erica? Any abstentions? We'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The item is approved by unanimous consent. Jonathan?
Okay, and rounding up our tour, at the top of the hill is Niagara Hall. The building at 831 to 833 Niagara Street, historically known as Niagara Hall, is significant under criterion A for both commerce and social history. Niagara Hall represents significant social and commercial history as a mixed-use building with an intact former social hall on the third floor, several largely intact commercial spaces on the ground floor, and apartments on the second floor that provided additional revenue for the building's owners. The period of significance runs from the building's original construction in 1891 through the closing of the social hall in 1970. It takes up the entirety of its urban lot on the eastern corner of Niagara and Rhode Island. The building was originally constructed to a height of 2 stories and sported some details related to the neo-Greek aesthetic, but was extended to 3 stories in 1894 with a top story with Richardsonian Romanesque influenced arched windows that accommodated the social hall. Basically, right above the Niagara Hall sign, there is a little bit of a seam in the brickwork. And so the 1891 building was just 2 stories. In 1894, they raised the building to accommodate the 3rd story in this social hall. And you can see this reflected in the Sanborn maps. The earliest Sanborn map is the early 1890s. It says 2S for 2 stories, but there's a 3 in the corner of the later ones where it's been changed to 3 stories. There is the Niagara Hall sign, and you can see those little rosettes. Well, that's very much kind of a neo-Greek detail. And then up here at the top of the building, on the other hand, you've got these kind of Richardsonian Romanesque arches showing, you know, that shift in style as well as that later addition. The ground floor storefronts retain enough architectural integrity to convey their historic function as flexible commercial spaces. The storefronts reveal a particular strategy for multiple commercial spaces in one building. The storefronts facing the primary artery of Niagara Street housed higher volume businesses such as saloons and groceries over time, while the side smaller storefronts contained barber shops, a Chinese laundry, confectionaries, and other small-scale businesses across the course of the building's life. The commercial spaces retain their volumes, and the front shop still has its historic press tin ceiling. Now, access from the Rhode Island side, from an entry and stair on this side of the building, the third floor hosted social hall hosted a wide variety of community functions ranging from lively public dances to political events, club meetings, and weddings, all the way from the 1890s through 1970. It comprised a suite of rooms that included a cloakroom, an office, a meeting room, and a dance and assembly hall. With its intact volume, plan, and woodwork, the third floor social hall is a rare surviving example of a once common recreational building type in Buffalo. Early in its life, Niagara Hall served as a rented gathering place for a wide variety of religious, ethnic, political, and social organizations, and a principal facility for their events. And here's an illustration of the Masquerade Ball of the Acquaintance Club in 1916. Later in its history, the use of the hall by specifically Italian-American groups became more predominant, which reflects shifts in the population of the neighborhood, basically. This nomination was prepared by KTA preservation specialists. This is a commercial tax credit project. There will continue to be commercial spaces on the ground floor. The upper floors will be apartments, and the social hall will be a very big apartment, apparently.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve? Wint, so moved. Second?
Second.
Molly, second. Then we have the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the nomination is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you, Jonathan and Sarah.
The Wilkinson Lent House is located in the town of Perrinton, Monroe County, and is significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as an unusual example of a rural colonial revival style residence that was an extensive remodel and expansion of an existing 19th century vernacular farmhouse. The property's period of significance, 1917, reflects the fact that the house retains a high level of integrity to its 1917 remodel and expansion. Little evidence of the residence's earlier history, including its original construction likely in the 1840s and minor remodeling in the 1880s, remains. The Wilkinson Lent House is located in a rural area in the southeast corner of the town of Perrinton. While much of Perrinton was subdivided for suburban development in the 20th century, this section of the town has retained its rural character and is characterized by open fields, a handful of 19th century farmhouses, and one historic church. The house continues to retain its historic rural setting. Family tradition holds that the home was built in 1811, though records documenting this have not yet been discovered. It's more likely that the home was built in the 1830s or 1840s by the Pound family, who owned the property until 1878. The property was then purchased by the Wilkinson and Lent families, who owned the property until 2024. It's likely that the first phase of minor remodeling was undertaken in the 1880s, shortly after the property passed into Wilkinson and Lent ownership. The photos you see here show what the residence looked like prior to 1917. A two-story residence with asymmetrical first floor facade, a modest Italianate entry porch, and a one-story side gable wing on the east side that likely served as a kitchen and buttery. These are wonderful photos. I love them. In February of 1917, Gilbert Wilkinson noted in his diary that he planned to build an addition to his house and that he estimated the work would cost around $3,000. It's possible that this decision was influenced by a recent inheritance or the expectation that his daughter, who was married in April of 1917, and her new husband would move into the family home. In March 1917, Gilbert Wilkinson hired a contractor to, quote, build a new part to the house and fix up the old part, end quote. This project turned into a substantial renovation of the residence, including removing the kitchen wing, adding the prominent colonial revival porch with Tuscan columns centered on the facade, the installation of new windows throughout the residence, including cottage-style windows with decorative mutton patterns on the first floor, the addition of a gable-roofed dormer on the facade above the new porch, the addition of a side porch, renovation of the interior, including a new fireplace, and the installation of a new bathroom, electricity, and plumbing. The exterior of the residence, seen here, distinctly reflects the aesthetic tastes of the 19-teens and communicates the Wilkinson family's position of relative prosperity and prominence within the community. The interior better reflects the full history of the building, as can be seen through the presence of 19th century features such as original trim and the staircase as seen on the right, and 20th century features such as the decorative cottage-style windows that you see on the left. The most notable changes to the property, which impacted eligibility in other areas, include the loss of agricultural outbuildings to fire in the 1940s. Overall, the Wilkinson Lent House retains a high level of integrity to the 1917 remodel. It is an excellent representation of how changing taste and increasing prosperity impacted the built environment, particularly in a rural area. This is an honorary nomination, and it was prepared by Katie Cuomo of Barrow Architecture.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So move. Erica.
Erica, second Fabiana. Let's call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Then thank you. The nomination is approved by unanimous consent. Julie.
All right, good afternoon. So this is the nomination for the Red Rock Monument located in the hamlet of Red Rock in the town of Canaan of Columbia County. The monument is eligible for the state and national registers of historic places under Criterion A for social history, for Criterion C for art, and Criteria Consideration F as a commemorative site. Its period of significance starts in 1860 with the construction of the monument and ends in 1950 with the celebration of the 200th anniversary of Red Rock's founding held at the monument. The Red Rock Monument was commissioned by a local committee and erected in 1860 to celebrate the hamlet's founding in 1750 and its official naming in 1825. It sits at the bottom of a steep valley of the Taconic Mountains with wooded hillsides to the north and south. The monument is situated between County Route 24 and the Indian Creek as shown in this 1873 atlas map. County Route 24 is the main thoroughfare through Red Rock, and it was a well-used stagecoach road between Stockbridge, Massachusetts and Hudson, New York. The monument's obelisk and boulder are two distinct components that form a single unified monument rising approximately 20 feet above street level. The obelisk is site-specific, featuring a simple design that was carved to blend naturally into its surroundings. It's a light gray color, 12 feet tall, and handcrafted from a single block of Stockbridge marble. It was shaped using simple hand tools and fixed atop a 250-ton red rock boulder. It is unknown who carved the obelisk, but we do know that its material came from quarries just over the border in western Massachusetts. On the shaft, there are two chiseled out inscriptions that read, Red Rock settled 1750 and erected 1860. The 650 million-year-old boulder is exceptionally rare. It was transported to the site during the last glacial period and likely came from the Burlington, Vermont area. The boulder consists of peridotite and red serpentinite. The red color is its most distinct feature, and no other boulders like it exist in the area. The precise alignment of the obelisk's placement atop the boulder is an excellent example of design and engineering. There are no visible anchoring systems, and it has not tipped over or even moved in 165 years. The monument's prominent location along the main road and its rural setting remain mostly unchanged, as seen here in these early 20th century photographs. Immediately after its installation, the monument became a symbol for the Red Rock community and played a significant role in shaping Red Rock's collective identity. The photograph on the right shows local community member and Civil War veteran Alonzo Reynolds proudly posing in front of the monument. The monument was not only a symbol for the Red Rock community, but also a site for commemorative events and ceremonies celebrating its history. The dedication ceremony for the monument's erection was held at the site of the monument on September 14, 1860, as detailed in the newspaper announcement here on the left. The inhabitants of Red Rock came together again at the monument on October 10, 1900, and held a large celebration that honored the 150th anniversary of the hamlet's founding. 50 years later, on August 12, 1950, another large celebration was held at the monument for the hamlet's 200th anniversary, which was highly anticipated. Flyers like the one on the right were widely distributed, and they attracted hundreds of attendees from all over Columbia County and the surrounding areas. These two photographs are from the 1950 ceremony, during which the speakers addressed the audience from a truck bed parked next to the monument. Among these speakers was Senator Ernest Hatfield of the 33rd District, who delivered the keynote address commending the community members of Red Rock for their dedication to preserving their past. The monument continued to play a part in commemorative events, including a ceremony in 2000 celebrating the 250th anniversary of the hamlet's founding. This photograph shows the event attendees with the monument and the descendants of Red Rock's founding families seated in the front. While the monument served as an important landmark for Red Rock, it was unfortunately vandalized with spray paint graffiti in 1992, as seen in the photograph on the left. The monument was immediately cleaned, but the marble rapidly developed lichen and mold, as seen in the middle image. A complete restoration project done by master mason Vern Tower took place in 2021, which returned the monument to its 1860 appearance, shown here on the right. The Red Rock Historical Society is the sponsor of this honorary nomination, and we have received 1 letter of support and no letters of objection. The author was Craig Dillon, project manager for the Red Rock Monument Restoration, and I believe he is on today with us and might want to say a couple words. Craig, if you're there, you might be muted.
Are there any comments or questions?
Some questions.
Fabiana?
So forgive me if this was already in the nomination and I might have missed it. This is Fabiana Rinaldi. So the monument commemorates the location having been settled in 1750. This morning we heard a wonderful presentation by Travis Bowman about who might have been here before and during the 1750s. And so I was wondering if there was any of that information or if it was taken into account. What is it that we're commemorating? An acknowledgement of who was there, if anybody was.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit in there. It's something that could be fleshed out, I think, a little more. They're specifically commemorating 1750, the hamlet of Red Rock being established from the town of Canaan. So there was some land that was carved up. So this is when Red Rock became the hamlet. Right. Okay. And of course, it was called other names before it was Red Rock in 1825.
And there was reference for founding families
of Red Rock. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
This is Wind. I know they are very pleased with the stability of this monument. I can't believe that it's really truly stable. I mean, because it's a man-made thing perched on a rough boulder.
Right.
And I guess we don't have too much seismic activity there, but we know there are vandals around. Hasn't been pushed down yet, but
right.
I hope that somebody has very quietly put some bolts in to keep it from coming down on a picnicking family.
Well, thank you, Wint, for that observation. Are there any other comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Heather moves, Wint seconds. Are there any abstentions? Let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you. The nomination is approved by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dan?
Good afternoon, everyone. I have but one nomination to present today, but I think this is a particularly significant one. That was a long time coming. Okay. The George and Theodora Bragg House, 611 J Street in the East Side neighborhood of Elmira, is significant under criterion B in the area of ethnic heritage Black. As the home of George and Theodora Bragg, an African-American couple whose life of service, dedication to the community, and the needs of the disadvantaged, in the face of many challenges, left a lasting impact on the city of Elmira. The residence is a two-story cross-gable modest Queen Anne built in 1890 and purchased by the Braggs in the mid-1950s, becoming their lifelong home. To the left, the driveway leads to a one-story, two-bay garage, contributing to the nomination. The Bragg house is little changed from the period of significance when George and Theodora Bragg occupied the residence together from the purchase of the house in the 1950s until George's untimely death in 1979. Today, the home is owned and maintained by their granddaughter and great-granddaughter as a second residence. They have kept the home much as it was, including retaining furniture and decor. The house served not just as a home, but as a focal point for many of George and Theodora's social activities. The newspaper clip on the left shows Elmira Mayor Lagonegro attending a coffee hour at the Bragg House. And on the right, Theodora Bragg puts the finishing touches on a wedding cake she made as part of a home-based catering service that she ran for many years. The couple lived a life of service. George joined the Civilian Conservation Corps as a young man, fought in the Pacific in World War II, and for many years served on the board of the Elmira Housing Authority, where he worked tirelessly, first as a board member, then as president, to meet the housing deficiencies and overcrowding faced by the African American population of the city. Sorry. The photograph shows George at the 1975 groundbreaking for the Edward Flannery Apartments. On the right can be seen a political advertisement from George's 1973 run for mayor. To date, George is the only African American to have run for mayor of Elmira, representing a major party. Both George and Theodora were active leaders in multiple civic and religious groups throughout their lives, including the Elmira NAACP, of which George was president at a crucial time, the United Auto Workers Union, of which George was a local officer, the Nanny Burroughs Club, of which Theodora was a founding member, the Chemung County Ladies of Charity, of which Theodora was president, the Immaculate Heart Society, of which she was also president. Their tireless and often voluntary work with these and many other groups earned George and Theodora the respect and admiration of their coworkers and many friends. This nomination recognizes George and Theodora Bragg's inspirational lives, their commitment to service, and their lasting contributions to the citizens of Elmira. If we have them on the connection, I believe Michelle Bragg and possibly her mother may wish to address the meeting. Michelle, if you're there, you can unmute yourself. She did mention she may not be able to make it in time.
Well, are there questions or comments?
Can you define for me, and I know this has nothing to do with you personally, but ethnic heritage Black, as opposed to what? White? Or mainstream history?
There is, under the ethnic heritage category, there is a list of ethnic heritage groups that the National Park Services uses for their definitions.
So like fancy houses that are lived in by white people are not ethnic? Is that what we're saying? I'm trying to understand why we categorize people in this way.
Correct.
Correct.
That's a good question, and you would have to direct that to the National Park Service.
No, I know it's not you. I just wanted that to be on the record because I find it offensive. It's like there's this mainstream category, and then we have these extra people that we are putting in here because for whatever reason, but it's a pretty offensive way to categorize people.
You know, some examples of some of the other categories.
Erica, please speak into the microphone.
Do you know what some of the other check boxes would be in that ethnic heritage
So off the top of my head, I would not feel comfortable running through the list.
And I can answer that question for the
curious.
board member. Sure, Latino, Asian American, Native American. It's a pretty antiquated, non-white, correct? And, they've been working and striving to update this bulletin for a long time. But we have not seen a result of it. We've also kind of pushed back on it, and we sort of try and avoid using the prescriptive language. Kath, if you want to talk, you have to come to a microphone, please.
They're not all what you would call minority group. It's ethnic heritage Norwegian or any kind of a group of people. I think with this one, Dan had trouble isolating one area that we could categorize them for their significance in. Was it social history? There wasn't one area that they were community leaders, and it was difficult to find something.
I'm
And
not
s-
laughing at you. I'm laughing at the idea that you said it's a category of people. I was thinking we could categorize the others as rich white.
Well, you could,
That would be an
but
ethnic group, right?
but it's not just people of color or like that. It's like ethnic heritage Norwegian, ethnic heritage, you know, French or whatever.
Yeah.
It's any kind of an ethnic heritage. So they do it that way. But I do think that we had a trouble isolating one area because they were active in so many different parts of the community. And so we settled on that they were important leaders in the Black community. And that was the only thing that would kind of a catch-all.
Thanks, Kath.
As opposed to, this is
Fabiana, please use your microphone.
This is Fabiana, as opposed to social history.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, the good news is that at least we're showing that African Americans didn't all live in public housing, which is the vast majority of the nominations that we have approved for people of color. So that's one positive in this antiquated system that we have.
This is Wint. I just think this is a terrific story of two people, one of whom, the husband, coming from a pretty miserable childhood, but just determining that he was going to make something of his life, and then finding a wife who was cut from the same cloth, and what they must have done for so many people in Elmira, and it's just wonderful to celebrate their lives and their house. And their descendant, I guess, it has a doctorate in some discipline, who was proposing this. Terrific American story.
Then why isn't it Fabiana's suggestion, social history as opposed to ethnic heritage? I mean, I think that you make a good point.
Yeah, I think it's a good point too. Social history generally is marked by moments in history or movements, not so much individuals who contributed to aspects of social history. So I think that's where the form is inadequate of you have to plug this in. So social history may be more, associated with like an action or an event.
Any other questions or comments?
And
Erica?
frankly, ethnic, it could just be ethnic heritage, whatever it is, without having to specify Norwegian or Latino or Swedish or Irish. I mean, because some people have bits and pieces of lots of those. So let it just be, well, whatever. We're not going to change the.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none, then I'm looking for a motion. Moved by Wint. Is there a second? Heather, any abstentions? We'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The vote is approved and the nomination is approved indeed by unanimous consent. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And Chris is next.
Good afternoon. I have two items. The first item is the E. Robert Moore houses in the Bronx in New York City. It's being nominated under criterion A in the area of politics, government, and social history, and under criterion C in the area of landscape architecture. The period of significance is 1964, which is the year the complex was completed and occupied. The Moore houses are located in the Mott Haven neighborhood of the South Bronx. The complex comprises 2 residential buildings set on a small landscape site that directly abuts St. Mary's Park to the west. The Moore houses is perhaps the only NYCHA development that directly borders a major city park, and this is the result of a historical anomaly. The curved boundary between the Moore houses and the park was the original route of the Port Morris branch of the railroad. It was an industrial railroad built in the 1840s. In 1905, this line was electrified and the tracks were actually rerouted through a tunnel under the park. And the old tracks were removed in 1912 and the land was incorporated into the park, creating these lots that directly abut the park without an intervening right of way. In the area of politics government, the Moore houses are an early example of NYCHA's Vest Pocket program, which was initiated under Mayor Robert Wagner Jr. as the direct response to the Federal Housing Act of 1954. This important housing law shifted focus from slum clearance, in quotes, to urban renewal, in quotes. It was meant to emphasize conservation and rehabilitation of existing building stock and promoted targeted demolition and new construction on smaller sites, such as the Moore houses, scattered throughout a neighborhood instead of concentrating these developments on large superblocks. Vest pocket housing is characterized by smaller sites. So the definition is it occupies a site of a city block or less, and it is only 1 to 4 buildings. So that's kind of the definition of what a vest pocket housing. In the area of social history, the Moore houses is significant as both a symptom and a cause of the economic decline of the South Bronx in the mid 20th century. The nomination details how this area was redlined during the Great Depression. It also suffered from deindustrialization following World War II. In the 1950s, public housing began to reshape the South Bronx both directly and indirectly. During that decade, NYCHA built a few superblock developments in the South Bronx. I will note that all of these from the 1950s were state or city funded, and therefore the residents had higher incomes than the federal developments elsewhere. At the same time, Harlem and Manhattan was being transformed with the highest concentration of public housing in the nation, and many of the residents displaced from those developments moved to the South Bronx. And so the neighborhood changed rapidly from a mostly European immigrant neighborhood to a mostly majority Black and Puerto Rican neighborhood. During the 1960s, government policy shifted from trying to retain the area's middle-class residents to providing housing exclusively for low-income residents. And this, of course, had the effect of concentrating poverty in the South Bronx and contributed greatly to the neighborhood's housing segregation. The connection between the houses and St. Mary's Park is why our National Park Service reviewer suggested adding landscape architecture as an area of significance. The landscape architects Innocenti and Wiebold clearly took pains to integrate their design with the adjacent green space as seen in this photo. St. Mary's was originally laid out in the 1850s as a private park, and it became a city park in the 1880s, not long after the southern part of the Bronx was annexed into New York City. It was one of the original 6 parks in the Bronx. And a commentator from the time when the park was incorporated into the city park system was praised St. Mary's natural character. So it was an informal, picturesque quality that remains today, with meandering pathways amid meadows and clumps of trees. The landscape architects clearly responded to this precedent through visual continuity. The Moore houses, the landscape design featured wooded mounds and winding walkways that connected directly with the walkways of the park. And in many ways, St. Mary's is a borrowed landscape for the Moore houses landscape. So this is the E. Robert Moore houses. The nomination was prepared by Kendall Anderson from the firm of Ryan. We have received a letter from the certified local government concurring that this property appears eligible for the state and national registers. This is a tax credit project with an approved Part 1 and 2, and I believe we have someone from the New York City Housing Authority on the line who would like to speak about this nomination.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Camille McLean. I'm a project manager at NYCHA's real estate development team. And I'll just be saying a quick a couple quick words about this project. This project is a RAD conversion through NYCHA's PACT program. We're very excited to be presenting this to the New York State Board for Historic Presentation. The Historic Tax Credit Program has been critical to our mission to provide quality public housing to New York City residents while also preserving the architectural and social history of New York City. I want to say a special thank you to the SHPO team for being true partners to NYCHA and for all their hard work and thoughtfulness in making these projects happen. As was stated, the Robert Moore Houses development is part of the larger Moore and East 152nd Street Cortlandt Ave PACT project. Moore is located in the Mott Haven neighborhood of the Bronx and consists of 463 units. As was stated, this project represents an opportunity to preserve a representative example of a vest pocket design in which the site integrates smoothly with its surrounding streetscape and the adjacent St. Mary's Park, one of the 6 original parks constructed in the Bronx, while creating a distinct community for its residents. The Historic Tax Credit Program will be instrumental in financing comprehensive repair work for residents on site. These sites are comprised of approximately 68% of units from the total overall project of nearly 700 units. We anticipate beginning construction early next year, and the historic tax credits are integral to the financing of a comprehensive repair work for residents at these developments. Thank you to everyone, and we look forward to working with you on our future public housing preservation projects.
Are there any questions or comments?
I know I'm the one that always comments on these. I have to say that this was the social history I thought was very well done in this one, and I think I would like to see in the future that all of the these housing projects are this well documented and this honestly documented. I think that was the thing that I found most helpful, was that you were honest about the history in this one. So congratulations on that. And I know we have some more to come back that have to come back to us because the history was not complete. So thank you.
Erica?
I have a question. Do we have, maybe I missed it in the material we got, do we have access or quick access to a site plan view that would better depict the landscape architecture, including that as a significant, because it's hard to see it from just this. Kind of looks, there's beautiful rolling hills behind you and then a leveled off, flat, treeless site.
I will certainly see if we have current plans and if we can get an original landscape
Trouble with that
plan too.
feature being included.
Yeah.
I'd like to add a comment, which is to concur with what Gretchen said about this particular draft. I think that it has advanced our work significantly, and you're to be commended for your role in that, Chris. And I would also say that I wonder if I found the concluding section to really dangle, and I wonder if you agree with that, Chris, and if so, what you might seek to do about it.
Certainly we'll look at that, and had some thoughts about maybe integrating that section into earlier sections about the South Bronx generally. So we can certainly look into that.
Great, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none then, do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
The motion from Gretchen, a second. Molly, any abstentions? There are none. Let's move to the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Thank you. The nomination is approved by unanimous consent. Chris, you have one other nomination.
My last item for the day is the Boston Spa National Bank in Boston Spa. It is being nominated under Criterion A in the area of commerce as Saratoga County's oldest operating independent financial institution, and also under Criterion C in the area of architecture, both as an intact example of the late federal style, but probably more importantly for a series of significant 20th century alterations that showcase the evolution of bank architecture. The period of significance begins in 1824 when the original building was completed and ends in 1973 when the last of these architecturally significant additions was completed. The bank is located on the southeast corner of Front and Science Streets in Ballston Spa on what is one of the village's primary commercial streets. The Ballston Spa Bank was established in 1838, which, no coincidence, was also the year that New York State passed the so-called free banking laws. This law allowed anyone to establish a bank in the state and was supposed to solve the patronage problem that plagued the previous chartering system. The bank became a national bank in the 1860s after the passage of federal banking laws during the Civil War. It joined the Federal Reserve System in the 1910s, and the bank weathered the Great Depression, even acquiring the assets of a local competitor. The building at 87 Front Street was originally built as a residence in 1824, about a decade before it was converted for the bank. So the bank was established in 1838, and then bought this property in 1839. So the house was converted to a bank in 1839. It retains many of its late federal style architectural features, particularly on the exterior. I'll note the splayed window lintels, the pitched side gables, and the simple molded cornice. And the Greek Revival entrance portico was added by the bank after they purchased the building in 1839. On the interior, some of these original details remain, particularly on the upper floor and in a couple of secondary spaces, as seen on the right photo here. As the bank grew and prospered, it expanded the building several times during the 20th century. In addition, housing a bank vault was added to the rear of the original building in 1924, and that vault is still in place as seen on the upper right photo. The sidewalk clock out front was added in 1926, and it has been counted as a separate contributing resource in the nomination. These changes were fairly minor, however, and the photo on the lower right shows that the primary banking hall was little changed through the early 1950s. A sizable addition and interior renovations was completed in 1952. These alterations were designed by the renowned bank design build firm of the Hodgson Brothers of New York City. The exterior addition, which is on the left side of the building, the 1.5-story addition, matched the original buildings in material and general style, kind of employing a conservative classical revival style. The altered interior, on the other hand, took a fully modern appearance. The closed rooms and heavy ornament of the past were replaced with open spaces and contemporary finishes, including wall-to-wall carpeting. The banking floor is almost tripled in size, and the teller counter was modernized to provide barrier-free access to the banking staff, as seen in the upper right image. Another addition was built in 1969 to 70, extending the 1950s wing to the rear of the lot. So it's the rear gable on the left image there. It also added a drive-through and walk-up teller windows. An advertisement from that time noted that now you can come as you are and bank from your car. It also praised the abundant free parking, noting that so you're bound to save time and efforts and can even bring the kids along. The drive-through was enlarged in 1973 with 2 car lanes covered by a gable roof, so that's the end of our period of significance. The Ballston Spa National Bank building is an excellent example of how the banking industry adapted to business and technology changes over more than 180 years of operation. This nomination was prepared by Kim Alvarez, and we have received a letter of support from State Assembly Member Mary Beth Walsh. This is a tax credit project with an approved Part 1 and approved Part 2.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So move, Erica.
Erica moves. A second?
Second.
Heather? Let me call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you. Then the nomination is approved by unanimous consent. Now I believe the next matter is to welcome our Daniel McKay to make his Deputy Commissioner's report. And while Daniel's coming to the microphone, I'll say thank you again to the presenters, the nomination sponsors, and their guests, and the staff.
And Carol, thank you for chairing. on short notice. We're sorry that Doug Pirelli was not able to join us. I think he's listening in and monitoring from Buffalo, but is not able to participate. Additionally, I want to note that J.D. Lorenzo, president of the Preservation League of New York State, is in Washington, D.C. this week, advocating on behalf of the Historic Preservation Fund, the underpinnings of virtually all federal historic preservation programming. And I will be making more detailed comments about that fund later in my remarks. We're ahead of schedule. I only had 15 minutes on the original schedule, but I have a half hour before my 15 minutes begin. So I'm gonna use that time. So, Ariana, I also want to note to you, I appreciate your participation as a proxy. You certainly were exercising your voice and your perspective today, and I just want to call that out. I so appreciate that you're willing to step into the meeting so sincerely. So many thanks for that.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. So I wanted to start my remarks by noting that for the first time in over a decade, we have a fully appointed 16-member New York State Board for Historic Preservation. 2 new and 1 reappointment were confirmed by the New York State Senate in late May after review and approval by the Governor's Appointment Office. Additional reappointments may be forthcoming before the end of the legislative session. So joining the board for our September meeting will be Ruth Pierpont, former Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer who served New York State Parks at the Division for Historic Preservation for 23 years, following earlier public service accomplishments leading the City of Troy's Planning Office. Many of you know Ruth well. Since retirement in 2016, she has served on the board of the Preservation League of New York State. And so, Wint, you will have some Deputy SHPO competition from your seat. So be ready.
I couldn't be happier to hear this.
Good, good, very good. We will be happy to have you, her join you in that capacity. Our second new appointment is Felicia Mayrow. Felicia is the Office and Grants Administrator at the Bernard F. and Alva B. Gimbel Foundation in New York City. The foundation's grant making is now focused on 2 programs: defending and strengthening democracy and climate and environmental justice. From 2000 to 2018, Felicia served as director of the New York City-based Neighborhood Preservation Center when it was first launched as a project of the St. Mark's Historic Landmark Fund. She also led the Landmark Fund as its executive director and currently serves on its board. In addition, Felicia has worked for several nonprofits in New York City, including the World Monuments Fund and Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. She has also served on the boards of the James Marston Fitch Charitable Foundation, Preservation Alumni, and the Bacchus Filipinas, a New York-based nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting research and documentation, preservation planning, conservation, and management of Philippine cultural heritage. Originally from Philadelphia, Felicia has a master's degree in historic preservation from Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Preservation, and Planning. And so we will welcome both of them to our September meeting. New York State budget. This Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation was well supported in the enacted budget agreement passed in mid-April, which included an $11 million increase in the agency's operational budget, which now totals nearly just shy of $170 million in operational support. The agency's capital budget was level funded at $200 million, continuing a historic high funding level. And additionally, the agency's staffing cap was increased to 2,469 positions, the highest level in nearly 2 decades. The agency greatly appreciates the governor and legislature's continued leadership in supporting the mission of our work. Also of note from the the fiscal year budget, state fiscal year budget, is that the New York State 250th Commemoration Commission received an allocation of $5 million to be divided between the New York State Department of Education and New York State OPRHP. The budget allocation for both agencies will be finalized by the September meeting of the commission. I will also want to note at the state level, the Erie Canal Bicentennial Commemoration The canal opened for the season earlier this month, although through navigation to Buffalo from Albany is impeded by high water levels and the emergency repairs to infrastructure damaged by those high water levels in the Little Falls region. The New York State Canal Corporation and the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor websites detail a wide range of commemorative events and activities across the corridor this summer, which will culminate in the hosting of the World Canal Conference in Buffalo in September and the departure of a replica canal packet boat, Seneca Chief II, on a cross-state voyage that will culminate in New York Harbor in October. So we will get you additional details, particularly about the Seneca Chief voyage, and hope that you might join and participate. The focus of my remarks, however, is they take a turn here with the federal update. Federally funded historic preservation programs are at a crisis point. We are 8 months into the current federal fiscal year, and state and tribal preservation offices have not received funds appropriated by Congress last year for the Historic Preservation Fund, the HPF, which is our primary federal funding source for preservation operations and programs, including virtually all of the National Park Service's grant programs. Many SHPO and TIPO offices across the nation expect to fully expend their current fiscal allocation of federal funds no later than December 2025, and thus many state preservation offices are projecting the need for layoffs to manage fiscal budgets. For some states, the crisis is even closer at hand. Ohio has already laid off 12 staff in their state preservation office. Connecticut, the lack of federal funds will impact June payroll, looking at possible reallocation of state grant funds to cover payroll in the short term. Maine, preparing for layoffs, looking at possible reallocation of state grants to cover payroll. Texas, lack of federal funds will impact payroll, but will have balance of federal fiscal year, so through September, covered by state funding source. Indiana, federal funding depletion in January. Arizona, federal funding depletion in August. Kansas, federal funding depletion in August. Georgia, federal funding depletion in September. Washington, federal funding depletion late October. Nebraska, federal funding depletion December. Missouri, federal funding depletion December. Arkansas, real estate transfer tax funding source should cover loss of federal funds to support continued SHPO operations. Michigan, parent agency, which is in the case of Michigan, their economic development agency, will commit to cover loss of federal funds. Each of our offices urgently awaits the release of the federal fiscal year 24-25 Notice of Funding Opportunity, known as NOFO, the annual application process by which SHPOs and tribal preservation offices apply for their annual formula-determined federal underwriting. These funds were allocated to our respective offices by Congress last year to carry out, in partnership with NPS, the federally directed obligations of the National Historic Preservation Act. Failure to fund these offices would represent an unfunded public mandate. $62.15 million awaits release for SHPO and TIPO operations. An additional $100 million was congressionally allocated for federal grant programs and related activity. This funding is currently held up by the White House Office of Management and Budget. $1.7 million is due to New York State by formula. This funding underwrites our federal programmatic responsibilities, Section 106 consultations, shepherding the National Register nominations through this process, and providing technical support for federal rehabilitation tax credit applications. Additionally, these federal funds are granted to communities via the Certified Local Government Program and cover administrative, operation, and travel support for federal program implementation. At this moment in my remarks, I want to point to an email that Dan McEnany sent to division staff yesterday morning on behalf of our senior staff team. This troubling information is impacting historic preservation offices nationwide. But simply put, New York State is not like other states. It is a factual superlative that New York State is the nation leader in every category of federal preservation programming. Additionally, New York State has parallel laws and incentives to federal programming which require our office's continued administration. To staff, is noting this is to staff, your work does not go unnoticed, and our staffing levels have been improved within the recently enacted state budget, recognizing the critical role that we serve. Despite the absence of federal funding, New York SHPO is fiscally whole through March 2026. Executive staff and the Chamber are fully informed about the delay in release of federal funding and its implication for other SHPOs as well as our own. To the credit of the professional staff of the New York SHPO, our staff remains focused on program responsibilities, and I believe that morale remains strong. DHP Director Dan McEnany and I consider it our highest responsibility to keep our staff intact and effectively contributing to the office's responsibilities under national and state historic preservation law. The delay of the White House Office of Management and Budget to release FY 24-25 congressionally allocated funds is also impacting numerous federal grant programs directed at historic preservation initiatives. The following programs are funded from the Historic Preservation Fund: Save America's Treasures, African American Civil Rights Grants, Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Grants, History of Equal Rights Grants, Semi-Quincentennial Grants, Underrepresented Communities Grants, Tribal Heritage Grants, Disaster Recovery Grants, Historically Black Colleges and Universities Grants. Each of these programs is currently in suspended animation. Grants that were open for application in fall 2024 have not been awarded, including 2 submitted by the State Preservation Office here in New York. Grants that would be open for application by this point in the calendar have not opened. Each of these grants relies on an annual allocation of Historic Preservation Fund dollars. New York SHPO and partner organizations have made great use of these grant programs in support of capital investment at our Revolutionary War sites and diversification of our National Register program listings, including most recently the Marcus Garvey Park nomination presented at the March meeting and today's Louis Jaffe Arts Theater nomination, the latest of numerous LGBTQ+ nominations advanced by this board for National Register consideration. Even when FFY 24-25 funds are released for application, many states are concerned that the grants will be conditioned with obligations to current and future White House executive orders that may prove unacceptable to state leadership. Compounding this situation in this current federal fiscal year is the explicit indication in the White House executive budget proposal for next federal fiscal year, beginning October 1st, that all funding for SHPO and TIPO offices and all funding for the full National Park Service portfolio of historic preservation grants, with the exception of the grant program for historically Black colleges and universities, will be zeroed out. These funding cuts are occurring simultaneously with forced retirements and reductions in force at the National Park Service that have the intended goal of a 40% staff reduction at that agency. NPS units across New York State have been impacted, as have NPS regional and central office programs. And I just saw a list this morning of more than 170 National Park Service staff working in the Northeast region that have had to leave the National Park Service since January. National heritage areas. The 4 congressionally established federal heritage areas in New York State are in the exact same funding position as the State Preservation Office. They have no access to congressionally allocated operational support funding, and the White House budget proposal for next federal fiscal year zeroes out funding for the heritage areas program nationally, meaning no funding for the Champlain Valley National Heritage Area Partnership shared between New York and Vermont, no funding for the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor staff based at Peebles Island State Park with us, no federal funding for the Maurice D. Hinchey Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area. This is the one heritage area in New York State, federal heritage area, that receives supplemental state funding. and no federal funding for the Niagara Falls National Heritage Area in Niagara. Legislation to establish a 5th National Heritage Area in the Finger Lakes region of New York State is pending despite these circumstances. Procedurally, where things stand is this. The White House budget proposal was released May 2nd. We know what signal that now sends. There is bipartisan support in the House and Senate for a $225 million appropriation to counter the White House proposal to bring that appropriation to near zero. The Senate Appropriations Committee meetings are underway, and the National Council of State Preservation Officers and other representatives of the preservation agenda are submitting testimony to the Senate, just as they have submitted testimony in support of SHPO and TIPO funding and a full allocation of the HPF. And the House will release their markup of the Interior Funding Bill on June 23rd. So we should have a sense within the next 10 days as to how the House will be approaching these two extremes of a zeroed out proposal from the White House and a program that historically the House and Senate have supported with significant bipartisan effort. So stay tuned. It is a bleak scene at the federal level. I do think we are taking all possible steps to communicate with the chamber, with the executive staff at Parks, this staff here at SHPO, and the National Register Program staff represented here, and the SHPO staff back in the office, I think are concerned, cautious, worried. We have never seen such a threat to the underpinnings of the totality of federal preservation programs as what the White House has proposed for next federal fiscal year. And we have never seen such an extraordinary delay in the release of previously congressionally authorized funding that would really that underpin our ability to serve our federal programmatic responsibilities. So this is a very distinct, very historic, very unique situation. I do want to call out that a number of state and local preservation groups have been in touch. They've been in touch by email. They're certainly making inquiries by social media. They are certainly taking efforts. The Preservation League and some New York City colleagues specifically, I think, have really pulled together. There have been several joint colleagues' letters that have gone into Washington that have gone to members of the New York State delegation. I will hold off on making a very similar report about what has happened to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the lack, just as we have designated a new national marine sanctuary in Lake Ontario, the loss of basically programmatic funding and senior staff. The acting director of that new marine sanctuary was forced into retirement. So that 4-county effort to establish the nation's 16th national marine sanctuary and 3rd on the Great Lakes, extraordinary local bipartisan support has been thwarted at the federal level through attrition, staff attrition, and pullback of funding. And the work that is happening to get that sanctuary established is actually being, in effect, privately funded by the Marine Sanctuaries Foundation. And so the work that will continue there for the next 3 years is outside the federal budget process. So that is my report.
Very sobering, Mr. Deputy Commissioner, indeed very sobering. Are there any questions for Dan?
I'd like to, this is Wint, I'd like to ask about 2 things. Are there any intimations that the federal tax credits are likely to be interfered with? And secondly, are there any intimations that the Park Service will be directed to refuse certain kinds of nominations that are perhaps not attractive to the White House these days?
I appreciate both questions, Wint. Those are open questions for us. To the latter, in terms of the National Register program, the standards and criteria of the National Register program are fixed as I understand it, in a slightly different way, a little bit more beyond the control of from one administration to another. That they exist sort of on a higher plane that would, at least as I understand it, should thwart sort of administrative interference, as is appropriate. That said, when we send down a nomination, we have several nominations. Certainly the Jaffe nomination will be a test of that system, right? Well, now we have sent down the Marcus Garvey Park. That is now listed on the National Register. So I have been encouraged by National Park Service staff to expect that there will not be direct interference or in the National Register nominations review and approval process. We may see delays because of staffing shortfalls in the rapidity with which they get reviewed. They have once submitted, the National Park Service has 45 days, business days, to review our proposal. And if they do not act within 45 days, under current law, it is listed on the National Register without NPS comment or action. So there is that escape clause, I suppose. To answer another piece of that before getting to the first part of the question, certainly we're concerned that the funding, the underwriting that has been available from the National Park Service, Underrepresented Communities Program, Civil Rights Program, other grant programs that we have used, we and other applicants have used so successfully in New York to, find the expertise and create the time and undertake the research to develop this material, that is going to be impacted. If there is no funding for these grant programs, we will need to find new sources of funding for those types of nominations. It has been a remarkable accomplishment of the National Park Service. We have led the way in terms of utilizing those funds to diversify our National Register list here in New York, as have other states. And so the loss of federal funding in that way, I think, will be impactful. And then to your first question, why don't you remind me what it was?
The tax credit.
Yes, sir, tax credit. Thank you. There is the 2017 tax reform bill passed in the first Trump administration. In its initial draft, did not include extension of the federal rehabilitation tax credit program. There was a bipartisan effort, both houses of Congress, to get the federal tax credit program reauthorized in that 2017 bill. As such, it is in the baseline version of the current federal tax bill. And there was actually an active ongoing effort to enhance the program as it exists in the federal tax proposal called HTC Go, which is actually a pretty remarkable proposal to make the federal tax credit program more effective, more efficient, more available. And everything identified in that enhancement bill will serve New York State very well. So I think the tax credit program as is, or perhaps even in an enhanced format, is going to be there. And it's that tax credit program, as well as the HPF funding, that Jay and others are in Washington yesterday and today, with meetings to advocate for. I think we have 5 or 6 co-sponsors from the New York State delegation for the HTC Go legislation, and there's an effort to continue building those numbers. So,
thanks.
Yep, you're welcome.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you, Carol.
You're welcome, Dan. All right, then. I have no other business that's new to discuss, and then I want to remind everyone that the next State Review Board meeting will be on the 10th of September in this same location and at the same time of day. So please be sure that's marked on your calendar.
Bring a blanket.
And bring a blanket is a recommendation I have from a colleague who will remain anonymous. There being no additional action, let me ask for a motion of adjournment.
I motion for adjournment.
I'll make a second.
Fabiana moved and Heather seconded that motion for adjournment. Let's have a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? We are therefore adjourned. Thanks everyone very much. Thank you.
And please take a piece of cake home.
Thank you to Erica for the cake.
You're welcome.